Chapter 170. Forefather Zhou's hands stopped on the young girl's shoulders. Even though his hands were clean, they formed a strong contrast with the white skin of the young girl's neck. There was an evil beauty. Because his heart was filled with ruthlessness and hatred, he did not realize the passage of time. His hands paused for a long time, maintaining a motionless posture. Zhou Susong did not understand what he was doing. For a moment, her body could not help but tremble. Forefather Zhou only woke up when the trembling passed into his palm. His body moved, and he returned to his couch. He waved his hand at the young girl with an amiable expression, indicating that she could leave. He said softly, "There should be no problems. You can continue to cultivate." Zhou Susang's anxiety immediately disappeared. She bowed respectfully to this old man and then retreated. Forefather Zhou did not look at her leaving figure. He was silent with his head bowed, his expression dark. Time was extremely pressing for an old person like him, but for a powerful cultivator who was stuck at a certain juncture and could not continue to cultivate due to his body, if he continued to cultivate, his entire energy would freeze. When he was used to spending large amounts of time cultivating each day, now that this large amount of time had become idle, this time would seem extremely long. Each breath was difficult to endure. In this kind of torment, a person who possessed great power but could not advance, and could only feel themselves aging and dying, could not have a happy mood. The only fortunate thing was that he had more time to think than ordinary cultivators. From the start, he did not have thoughts of letting Ding Ning live for long. The painting remnant scroll of the Zhou family could not be passed to outsiders. Otherwise, the declining Zhou family's last foundation would disappear. According to his cultivation experience, before the Min Mountain Sword trial started, Ding Ning's energy should have started to freeze. At that time, he would not need to act. His opponents in the Min Mountain Sword trials would make Ding Ning disappear from this world. Right now, Ding Ning's comprehension of the painting remnant scroll was of no help to him. He first had to confirm that this wine shop youth had not lied to him. Then he did not want this wine shop youth to die meaninglessly to him. It was meaningless. That is a true grand event, one that may never happen in the future. We can't miss such a grand occasion. With a dark expression, Forefather Zhou crossed his fingers and slowly murmured to himself. The event he spoke of was naturally the Deer Mountain Conference. The Deer Mountain Conference that the four great dynasties had agreed on 9 years ago was a battle of wits and courage between the dynasties and the revelation of their deepest strength. Not only would the emperors of the various dynasties come to Deer Mountain, but the most outstanding figures of the various dynasties would also gather at Deer Mountain. Now that the Yuanwu Emperor had reached Realm 8, every cultivator in the world naturally wanted to know and see for themselves what kind of shocking storm he would bring. Even though all of Deer Mountain would be sealed off by the armies and cultivators of the various dynasties, if one could get to the mountains around Deer Mountain, they would be able to see the changes in energies at the peak of Deer Mountain. For cultivators like Forefather Zhou, being able to sense some of the changes in the energies of cultivators of higher levels when they moved or released primal energies of the universe at a close distance might be a great opportunity. For Forefather Zhou, the words Deer Mountain Conference made him think of many more things. Deer Mountain was not far from Wu Mountain, and in the Wu Mountain there was something very useful to him. But regardless of whether he went to Deer Mountain or Wu Mountain, he had to leave the mountain and the Zhou family ink garden. It is time to go out for a walk. Forefather Zhou looked at the night sky outside and said coldly to himself. Then he said in a deep voice, "Prepare the car." The Zhou family ink garden was at least half a day's journey from Falling Parasol. If they set off now, they could reach Falling Parasol in the morning. In the darkness before dawn, Zhang Sun Qianxue opened her eyes. All the energy in her body related to cultivation had been gathered into her energy and sank into her jade palace. The dark sword in her jade palace greedily absorbed all the vital energy and primal energies of the universe that had sunk into the jade palace without her needing to think. Ordinary life-bond swords could not contain such astounding vital energy and primal energies of the universe, but this Nine-Hell King sword seemed to contain a real world, a netherland. Her perception also seeped into the sword, and through the sword's radiance, It expanded several times. The countless little silkworms in Ding Ning's body sensed her abnormality. He opened his eyes warily and said softly, "What is it?" Realm 7 second class, incomplete energies. More than half of his energy sealed. Zhang Sun Qianxue glanced at him and said slowly, "It is Forefather Zhou. He should have come to find me." Ding Ning did not hesitate to confirm the identity of the visitor. He sneered. He hid in Ink Garden for so many years. Everyone in Chongling thought he was dead. Now he has come to find me personally. It does not appear to be an ordinary matter. While more than half of his energy has been sealed, it is just that the flow of vital energy and primal energies of the universe is not smooth. Also, he mainly cultivates star fiendish energies. Before the first year of Yuanwu, he had experienced many cruel battles. If we really fought, I may not have the confidence to win. Zhang Sun Qianxue said with a rare seriousness, "You can defeat a person like this." Ding Ning thought for a moment and did not answer. Zhang Sun Qianxue frowned and showed a disdainful expression. "It seems I thought too much. You have a protective talisman now." Ding Ning understood her meaning and did not feel any shame. He said calmly, "Let's see what he comes for." Multiple carriages stopped in an alley not far from Falling Parasol. In the middle carriage, Forefather Zhou narrowed his eyes and looked at Chongling that was immersed in the last bit of darkness before dawn. After leaving Ink Garden, this Chongling had changed countless times from the Chongling in his mind. It had become even more majestic, and he could not imagine the blood of the past. Many of the original residences had disappeared. He could not see any traces. It turned out that many things could really be erased without leaving any traces behind. But he did not want to leave no traces behind in such a majestic city. When the first ray of light landed on Falling Parasol, Zhang Yi stood up and started to sweep the courtyard. The broom in his hand was always a hair away from the ground. Threads of energy flowed out of his hands and blew on the ground. The fallen leaves and dust on the ground were swept clean, but not a sound was made. He did not make a sound, so he would not disturb Shui Wangxi's sleep. But he treated this kind of sweeping as homework. Looking back at his days of cultivation in Falling Parasol, he found that his improvement was faster than when he cultivated in White Goat Cave. He could not find the reason, but Ding Ning was well aware of the reason. Cultivation emphasized the state of mind. When one did something with a sincere heart, it was easier to succeed. Shui Wangxiu had never been so weak. The filial Zhang Yi had never been so worried about Shui Wangxiu. Taking care of Shui Wangxiu with all his heart was the most important thing to him. How could he not improve quickly if he did everything with all his heart? After sweeping the courtyard, Zhang Yi still silently opened the door. He took some dry wood and the stove outside to make a fire. At this time, Ding Ning opened the door like usual. At this time, Zhou Xie walked out of the alley. Ding Ning knew that Forefather Zhou had come in person, so he was not surprised. Zhang Yi was shocked to see Zhou Xie arrive. "My forefather wants to see you." Zhou Xie bowed slightly in front of Ding Ning with his head bowed and said softly. Ding Ning did not speak. He nodded and followed Zhou Xie out of the alley. As they approached the carriages, the curtain of Forefather Zhou's carriage was pushed open by a gentle force and revealed Forefather Zhou's figure. Ding Ning bowed respectfully and said, "Why have you come to see me so early?" Forefather Zhou had been watching Ding Ning's actions and expressions all this time. An imperceptible cold light flashed through his eyes. He felt that calmness could conceal many emotions, but he had the warmest smile on his face. He patted the soft couch next to him and said benevolently, like he was greeting a descendant of the Zhou family, "Come here, sit and talk." Ding Ning sat down respectfully like an obedient child ready to listen. "Let me see your cultivation." Forefather Zhou benevolently reached out with his hands like he was touching the young woman and placed them on Ding Ning's arms. Ding Ning's expression did not show any abnormalities. As his energy flowed out, Forefather Zhou's breathing paused slightly. He did not detect any abnormalities. Everything about Ding Ning was as he had expected. In other words, this wine shop youth had not comprehended anything more than him. Perhaps he was being too suspicious. How could a junior like him comprehend something more profound and correct than him in such a short time? A hint of self-mockery appeared at the corners of Forefather Zhou's mouth. Then it turned into endless coldness and ruthlessness. In a short time, it turned to extreme gentleness. In a few more days, it will be the Deer Mountain Conference that will decide the future of the Qin dynasty. He looked at Ding Ning and said softly, "This is a true grand event.
I want you to come with me."
You can consider it. While it is possible to obtain some special opportunities, going to a grand event like this will be very dangerous. He paused and then added amiably, "Even cultivators who have been summoned by the Holy Spirit to enter Deer Mountain may not be safe. We cannot enter Deer Mountain and can only go to the forest closest to Deer Mountain to watch the event. But there will also be cultivators from other dynasties going, so conflict cannot be avoided. Even I cannot guarantee that I will be able to leave unharmed. So you do not have to answer me immediately.
You can think about it.
You said that you cannot guarantee that you will be able to leave unharmed. It is normal for a cultivator, like me, to die there." Ding Ning thought coldly inside. But other than a thoughtful expression, his expression did not change. Chapter 171. Following Forefather to see such a grand event will definitely be beneficial. Ding Ning was silent for a moment and said, "But while I am cultivating outside, I am a student of the Green Vine Sword Academy. If I want to leave Chongling and go to Deer Mountain, I need the permission of my teacher. If there are no accidents, the Holy One will depart today." Forefather Zhou did not immediately respond to Ding Ning's words. Then he looked kindly at Ding Ning and said, "Of course you need the permission of your teacher. But if you really want to come with me to see, you need to hurry." "This junior understands." Ding Ning bowed his head and said respectfully. Forefather Zhou smiled in satisfaction and said, "Then go. There will be a carriage from the Zhou family waiting here. If you are able to go, you can depart at any time." Zhang Yi looked nervously at the entrance of the alley. When he saw Ding Ning walk back, he immediately went over and asked softly, "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, why did Forefather Zhou come to find you so early?" Ding Ning thought for a moment and said, "He wants me to go with him to Deer Mountain." Go to Deer Mountain? Zhang Yi's personality was overly generous, but he was intelligent. He immediately understood what this meant and said gravely, "The Deer Mountain Conference is a gathering of the top cultivators of the world. It can be said to be the biggest event in the cultivation world. These top cultivators will fight each other. Even just feeling that kind of power will be of great benefit to one's future cultivation. But everyone knows this. No one knows how many cultivators of the Qin dynasty, the Chu dynasty, the Qi dynasty, and the Yan dynasty will come to Deer Mountain, and what will happen." After a pause, Zhang Yi looked at Ding Ning and said gravely, "Because there has never been a conference like this before, there has never been such a thing. There are no examples to use." Before Ding Ning could reply, an old voice came from the small courtyard behind him. "You've said so much. Your junior brother Ding Ning must know everything. The key is to see what he thinks." Zhang Yi immediately turned around. "Cave Master, you're already awake?" Shui Wangxi sat at the head of the bed and slowly put on his clothes. He said to the outside, "When you reach my age, you will know that even if you want to sleep, a little noise will still wake you up." Zhang Yi, who had already reached the door, blamed himself and said, "Disciple's voice is really too loud. I'm too old. What does it have to do with you?"
"Come in."
Shui Wangxi waited for the two to enter before looking at Ding Ning and asking, "There is nothing to consider before going to Deer Mountain. The key is what you think." Ding Ning glanced at him and said simply, "I want to go. Since you have decided to go, then go." Shui Wangxi looked at Ding Ning and smiled. He said, "It seems you are only thinking about safety." Ding Ning bowed deeply to Shui Wangxu and then bowed to Zhang Yi in the same serious manner. "Little sect brother, no, junior brother Ding Ning, what are you doing?" Ding Ning had rarely bowed so solemnly to Zhang Yi. So when he saw Ding Ning's actions, Zhang Yi was at a loss. "When I am not in Chongling, Cave Master will rely on you and junior brother Shin Yi to take care of him. You have to take good care of him and wait for my return." Ding Ning looked at Zhang Yi and said calmly, "Deer Mountain Road is far. When the Deer Mountain Conference ends and I return, the Min Mountain Sword Trials will start. Zhang Yi completely understood Ding Ning's meaning and returned the bow solemnly. He said, Junior brother Shen Yi and I will take good care of Shui. We will wait for junior brother Ding Ning to come back and shine at the Min Mountain Sword Trials and bring true glory to White Goat Cave. The sword essence of the painting remnant scroll is enough to compete with any sword manual. The White Goat Sword Manual is also great in disguise. I hope senior brother can improve. Ding Ning thought seriously for a moment and then said to Zhang Yi, I will say something else to senior brother. The morning rain is light, the morning rain is soft, but it can wash away the essence. The white goat hanging horn is meant to be in a stalemate. The true meanings of the two may have similarities. Zhang Yi stilled and could not understand the meaning of Ding Ning's words. But he instinctively felt that these words were extremely important and the words were clear in his mind. Shui Wangshu unconsciously frowned and then smiled as though he was enlightened. He looked at Ding Ning and said, It seems that I am not a grandmaster, you are? Ding Ning shook his head and said, If this disciple is a grandmaster, then teacher is naturally a true grandmaster. Shui Wangshu laughed loudly. Zhang Yi looked at the two in confusion. Shui Wangshu put away his smile and said, Study well. Forefather Zhou had not strayed too far from falling parasol. Since he had left in garden, he could not easily return. In his view, Ding Ning could not refuse his suggestion. Since this wine shop youth had obtained a powerful method to condense fiendish energy from him, then he would naturally feel that following him would be of great benefit. This was an irresistible temptation for any cultivator. Yet he did not know that Ding Ning understood his personality very well. Ding Ning walked out of Shui Wangshu's small courtyard. He walked to a nearby shop and said a few words to a waiter. Then he returned to the wine shop as though nothing had happened. Zhang Sun Qianxue understood his intentions and ignored him. An hour later, a carriage stopped at the entrance to the alley. Fu Su walked out of the carriage and hurried into the wine shop. Why are you in such a good mood today to have someone find me so early in the morning? Is there something interesting? Fu Su asked with a smile when he saw Ding Ning sitting in the wine shop. It's not something interesting. It's something dangerous. Ding Ning waited for Fu Su to come over. He sat across from him and said, You should know of the Zhou families? Fu Su frowned slightly and glanced at him. He said, You speak of the Zhou family, you should be referring to the Zhou family within garden. You also say there is a dangerous matter. The Zhou family is making trouble for you? Ding Ning did not answer and asked calmly, Do you know of forefather Zhou? Fu Su did not answer and his expression changed slightly. He is not dead yet. Ding Ning shook his head and said, He taught me a fiendish energy condensing method. Now he is inviting me to go with him to Deer Mountain. Fu Su was shocked. Go to Deer Mountain? Ding Ning nodded and looked calmly at the other's shocked eyes. He said, You definitely know that going to Deer Mountain is a very dangerous matter. I came to find you to ask if you want to go with me. Fu Su took a deep breath and said, You want me to go with you? Ding Ning did not explain. He just looked at him and nodded. Fu Su was slightly moved. He thought that true friends were those who could trust each other with life and death. He thought that Ding Ning thought of him as a true friend.
But then he was slightly terrified.
He lowered his head and said, I do not know if the family will allow me to leave Chongling and go to Deer Mountain. Wait for me. But he immediately looked up at Ding Ning and said, I will ask the family. If the family agrees, I will go with you. Ding Ning looked at him and nodded. Looking at Fu Su's unusually clean features, he could not understand how complicated people like the Yuanwu Emperor and Jing Xiu could have a son so different from them. Fu Su had to ask the family's opinion. His question would naturally be passed to the study of the mistress deep in the palace. There were no mysterious threads of light around the Empress' fingers, but in her perception, in the endless sky, the pale white flames that did not belong to this world happily wrapped around the small sword that was as black as scrap metal like fairies. The runes in the depths of this small sword that was charred black like scrap metal slowly absorbed the power of the pale white flames. Some of the damaged tiny particles began to emit pale white light, like rusty iron shavings that were transforming into gemstones. Forefather Zhou is not dead. He hid in the Zhou family ink garden for so many years. What does he want to do now that he has come out? Hearing the palace attendant's report, she said indifferently to herself, "Since Fu Su wants to go, then let him go." In the next moment, her flawless face looked up slightly and said to the palace attendant in front of her. Someone who could report these matters to her was naturally not an ordinary palace attendant. So when she heard these words, this palace attendant did not immediately accept the order and leave. Instead, she said hesitantly, "Nyang Nyang, this seems to go against the Holy One's intentions, is it not so good?" "What do you know?" The Empress scolded, but she wasn't angry. Instead, a strange smile appeared on her face. "He brought his people, so why would he care about my arrangements? If I tried to figure out his intentions, that would be really bad. Also, Fu Su is too clean. It is good to let him see the viciousness of people's hearts." Other than the last sentence, the palace attendant still did not understand. The Empress glanced at her and said coolly, "You should know that our most important relationship is first and foremost that of husband and wife. Only when this relationship is above everything else will it be good, and everything in Chongling will be stable." After saying this, she looked at the sky outside and said slowly with some pride, "The Holy One should have left by now." The palace attendant's body shook slightly. She involuntarily turned her head to look at the distant sky behind her. The Holy One had left. Then this enormous Chongling would be placed in the hands of the mistress in front of her. Chapter 172. That wine shop youth did not agree. He agreed, but invited one person. He wants to ask if forefather can travel with him. Who? Gongzi Su, a student of Fish Sun Sword School. What is his background? An orphan of Chongling's Drum Tower Alley. He cultivated with Fish Sun Sword School's Lu Huanghe since childhood, so he is different from ordinary students. Is there a problem with the source? There is no problem. The vice principal of Fish Sun Sword School and I are old friends. What he said is the same as the information I received from multiple teachers. In that case, let them come over. The sunlight grew brighter, and the spring light seemed to seep through the thin carriage curtains and onto Forefather Zhou's body. Forefather Zhou did not look at Zhou Yunhai's retreating figure, but looked darkly at his bulging belly. Zhou Yunhai had personally inquired about this information and verified it from many sources, so there shouldn't be any problems. Moreover, a student from the Fish Sun Sword School following him didn't seem to affect his entire plan. However, for some reason, he felt that the actions of this wine shop youth were beyond his expectations and faintly brought him some unknown threat. Two youths quickly walked over, and their youthful figures entered his hazy eyes. His eyes seemed to welcome a sunrise. The haze quickly disappeared and was replaced by warmth and benevolence. A wave of gentle aura gently exuded from his body, slowly parting the carriage curtains to the sides. He carefully looked at Fu Su. Fu Su wore a blue robe that had been washed until it was white. He had a handsome appearance, clean features, and exceptionally transparent eyes. But when he sensed Forefather Zhou looking at him, he blushed slightly. Such a shy and clean person usually only existed at the bottom. If he really had some background, he would not have been allowed to go to a place like Deer Mountain. Forefather Zhou's lips curled into a self-deprecating smile. He thought that it was because he had not left in garden for a long time, so he thought too much after entering Chongling. What threat could a youth like this pose to him? He smiled warmly and beckoned to Ding Ning and Fu Su, saying, "Come here." When he walked in front of this old man, Fu Su was slightly shocked. He had not expected Forefather Zhou to be so amiable, completely different from the vicious old nobility of the legends. But at this time, he felt a weak wave of yin energy come from Forefather Zhou's body and enter his own. He immediately realized that this forefather was investigating his cultivation. He should be the only youth in Chongling who had reached Realm 5. For his identity, this kind of cultivation that was too astounding for his age was the greatest flaw. But he was certain that Forefather Zhou could not detect his true cultivation. So like Ding Ning in the past, he did not seem to sense anything and allowed this weak yin energy to flow through his body. It's only level 3 middle class? His meridians are weak and not good cultivation material. Sensing the strength of Fu Su's vital energy and then feeling that it was weak compared to ordinary cultivators and narrow meridians that were not conducive to vital energy flow, Forefather Zhou's self-deprecation grew. True satisfaction flowed onto his face. "Have you prepared everything that needs to be prepared?" he asked as he retracted the weak vital qi. Ding Ning answered curtly and respectfully, "Everything is prepared." This kind of acting was not a pleasant thing. Forefather Zhou, who had always seen black and white, was not used to the bright spring scenery. So after these words, he immediately felt impatient. The curtain slowly closed. His voice came from behind the curtain, saying, "In that case, you too can board the carriage. We will depart immediately." Ding Ning and Fu Su walked towards a carriage in the back. Only when he lifted the curtain and bowed into the carriage did an imperceptible cold and disdainful expression appear at the corners of his mouth. If you can sense the true progress of Fu Su's cultivation method, then why did the dynasties and even the great rebels do all they could, even sacrificing powerful cultivators, to figure out the true progress of the Yuanwu Emperor? The wheels started to roll. Ding Ning, who had not had much to do with this event, started to depart. Ding Ning's mind calmed down again. No conspiracy could win against the general trend. Now he had grasped the general trend. Ding Ning, who had not needed to go to Deer Mountain, started to depart. Many people in the world had started to depart, and many were preparing to depart. The northernmost part of the Qin dynasty originally belonged to the Zhao lands. But further north, past the Yin Mountain, was an endless desert. Even the former Zhao dynasty stopped at the Yin Mountain and did not expand their lands into this desert. The most barren and unsuitable places for people to live in would often have people living there. In the depths of the desert, there were many tribes that lived by herding. In one of the tribes by the scorching river, a shaman-like man with messy hair sat cross-legged in front of a fissure spewing earth fire. On the black rock condensed from lava in front of him, there were countless scratches used to record time. "It is time to depart," he sighed. His voice did not have the accent of this tribe, nor did it have the accent of the former Zhao dynasty. It was the accent of the former Han dynasty. When he stood up, the flames spewing out of the fissure in front of him suddenly became fierce. They instantly rose to a shocking height of several hundred zhang, illuminating half of the desert sky red. The black smoke produced by the flames rolled towards the distant horizon like dark clouds. It gave people the feeling that the earth fire here had been forcibly suppressed by him all this time, which was why it had only just reached the height of the fissure. Amidst the raging underground fire, which had reached a height of thousands of feet, a red pill was spinning in the air. It looked like a pill, but at the same time, it looked like some kind of metal object. The man, who looked like a desert adept, opened his mouth and swallowed the red pill. A ball of red mist spread from his body. Then he started to walk and depart. Some people's departure was earth-shaking and caused worldly phenomena, but some people's departure was silent. Li Lingjuan's caravan had changed directions and left Wu Mountain for a long time. On the second morning after Ding Ning left Chongling, two Qi dynasty cultivators dressed in black robes with their hair tied into 3 bundles appeared on a mountain path of Wu Mountain. The slightly older man of the two closed his eyes and listened for a long time. Then he turned to look at his younger companion and said softly, "They have come." The young cultivator's face was immediately filled with excitement. He said, "If this person is really someone from the Qin who is extremely useful to the Deer Mountain Conference, we have done a great service to the Qi dynasty today." The older man looked coldly at him. He did not show any excitement and felt a hint of coldness. It was not that he was not loyal to the dynasty, but he was not as inexperienced as this young cultivator. If, according to the intelligence reports, this person was someone that the Yuanwu emperor of the Qin dynasty had specially sent from a distant place, then how could this person be ordinary? "What, Official Chen, are you very nervous?" The young cultivator looked at his gaze and smiled proudly. He said, "The two of us are working together, and this is an ambush. Even if this person is someone important, even if he is one of the 13 marquises of the Qin dynasty, we can defeat him. Why be so cautious? Do not speak. The older man's expression changed slightly, and he suddenly shouted. The young cultivator raised an eyebrow slightly and had a disapproving expression. On the mountain path far away from them, a carriage was traveling. The forests of Wu Mountain were thick and shrouded in mist. There were also the sounds of countless birds and beasts in the forest. Even if they spoke loudly, even if the person in the carriage had hearing multiple times that of ordinary people, they could not hear. The older cultivator was able to sense the arrival of this carriage because he had made some secret arrangements on the mountain path ahead of time. This was a secret method that belonged to his sect, and outsiders could not know of it. But at this time, the person in the carriage who had been sleeping with his eyes closed suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction of him and the young cultivator. The person in the carriage was a man in his 30s. His features were delicate, but he gave off an indescribable golden energy. He was clearly only wearing the most ordinary blue robes, but every part of his body, his hair, every line of his facial features, and even the creases of his clothes were like sharp swords, dazzling to the eyes. The older cultivator of the Qi dynasty could not see the person in the carriage, but at this time, his eyes felt a stabbing pain. The sword essence of the person in the carriage had pierced through the cold air and arrived in front of him from such an astounding distance. Who was the person in the carriage? His breathing stopped completely at this moment, and the blood in his body turned extremely cold. At this time, the carriage driver wearing a bamboo hat at the front of the carriage bowed slightly and suddenly exerted force in his hands. The eyes of the two seemingly inconspicuous gray horses suddenly turned blood red, and they started to exert force. In the blink of an eye, the raging sound of iron hoofs covered all other noises and turned into a terrifying music with a murderous intent. The older cultivator's expression changed dramatically. He shouted and attacked first. A black bone staff appeared in his hand, and as he crazily poured his true essence into it, 2 huge black flowers suddenly formed in front of him. It was also at this moment that the person in the carriage far away had already flown out of the carriage. With just one step, the person in the carriage seemed to become a flying sword. The young Qi cultivator's expression changed in shock. Just as he heard the sound of silk tearing in the air, he saw a sword path appear in the air. An indigo figure was coming through the air. Chapter 173. The young cultivator was a disciple of a secret sect in Qi. While young, he had reached realm 6. He was a rare cultivation genius in the last few decades. He had just left the sect and could not help but be proud. But an expert was an expert. With a shout, he used all of his power. His body quickly withered like a dried flower. There was a muffled sound. A cluster of black flame that was as thick as ink surged out of his hand. Inside the black flame was a fist-sized black skull that was pieced together by countless tiny crystals. As he shouted, the black skull seemed to have a life of its own. It let out an unbelievably sharp screech. Countless insects, birds, and beasts in the surrounding mountains and forests had just started to feel fear. Before they knew what had happened, they had already died amidst these mournful cries. Some of the energy in their bodies naturally seeped out, gathering towards the black skull. Countless sound waves turned into tangible paths in the air and fell towards the azure figure in the air like dancing zither strings. The azure-robed cultivator flying in the air had an indifferent expression. Looking at the young cultivator's withered body and the dancing sound waves in the air, the corners of his mouth curled up in a disdainful smile. Blood sacrifice art, Ghost King's killing sound, from the Ghost Sound sect. His body did not even make any obvious movements. As he spoke, streams of breaths that came out from his mouth turned into substantial sword intents. They brought out streams of astonishing air currents and instantly slashed through all the sound waves that were charging toward him. The young cultivator's body suddenly shook, as if he was smashed by an invisible mountain. That black skull in the black flames in front of him trembled, releasing terrifying screeches, and actually directly flew back, smashing into his palm. This black skull had originally come out of the young cultivator's palm. It had clearly merged with his vital energy and become a life bond item of his vital energy. Yet for some reason it did not merge with his body. With a bang, this skull was like another person's weapon and fiercely collided with his palm. His sleeve immediately shattered into countless pieces that flew around his arm. The meridians in this young cultivator's arm exploded like hemp ropes that couldn't bear the power. Before he could give off a scream, the young cultivator's body fell back and flew backwards. In a flash, he smashed into the forest behind him like a stone thrown from a catapult. At this time, the azure-robed cultivator, who was even faster than ordinary flying swords, finally attacked. A thick black sword appeared in his hand. The surface of this thick sword was full of uneven textures, like pieces of dragon scales. When the older Chi cultivator saw this sword, he understood this person's true identity. He knew that with the power he had just activated, he could not stop this person's sword. So, the moment the two strange black flowers formed in front of him, he smashed the black bone staff in his hand towards the ground in front of him. There was an explosion. When the black bone staff touched the ground in front of him, it exploded into countless triangular bone fragments. Each fragment spun violently and charged into the air. Black threads of light flowed out of the cracks of these fragments. They intersected and formed a black beam of light with unknown facets that surged towards the azure-robed cultivator. The azure-robed cultivator was still cold, but the disdainful smile at the corner of his mouth disappeared. The long sword in his hand slashed down without any fancy moves, but every scale on the sword lit up one after another like lamps. When all the scales were completely lit up, a dragon's roar came from his sword. The tip of his sword glowed with a golden sand-like light, and a terrifying aura gushed out from it. The golden sand immediately grew and turned into a golden dragon. The golden dragon was very large, and it didn't look like it was formed by the condensation of the chi of heaven and earth. Instead, it looked like a real thing. The scales on its body were as brilliant as the purest gold, but they were also slightly transparent, and they were emitting a terrifying pressure and light. This is the dragon scale sword of Fong Ho province. This person is General Shunwei's military pay. How can he be so strong? The young Qi cultivator, who had smashed through dozens of trees, had just landed on the ground. He sat in a pile of broken wood with all his bones shattered. Looking at the golden dragon, he did not dare to believe his eyes and perception. The golden dragon swooped down and swallowed the black light and the two black flowers that emerged from the ground. The enormous body slid across the ground. The older Qi cultivator's body was drowned in the golden flames. Where the golden dragon brushed against the ground, there were explosions and two balls of thick smoke. You can take one of my attacks. It seems that you are Luo Chenkai of Qi's Inyuan sect. The azure-robed cultivator landed and said slowly as he looked at the dust in front of him. In the dust, the older Qi cultivator's figure slowly appeared. He was still standing, but his robes were riddled with holes. Blood seeped out of them. Hearing the azure-robed cultivator's calm and cold voice, the older Qi cultivator wiped away the blood on his face and sighed. I thought that it may be a marquis, and that it may be General Shenwei, but I had not expected you to be so strong. The Qin dynasty only had one General Shenwei, Fong Xiang of Fong Ho province. This azure-robed cultivator was naturally Fong Xiang. Fong Xiang looked at the older Qi cultivator and said coolly, My Fong Ho province has been the leader of the 13 marquises' establishments in Chongling these years. Of course, I did not rely on my younger brother, who has been sitting for more than a decade. Hearing this explanation, the older Qi cultivator stilled slightly and seemed to understand. I took the imperial order to come to Deer Mountain from here. This is a secret matter. Fong Xiang looked at him and said, I want to know where your information came from. After a pause, Fong Xiang looked into his eyes and said seriously, It is not easy for you to have such cultivation. I am not greedy. If you tell me where your information came from, I will let you leave. The older Qi cultivator smiled slightly, his smile exceptionally proud and determined. As a Realm 7 cultivator, he naturally had his pride. Even though he had underestimated the strength of this person for some reasons, he knew what the Qi dynasty needed the most. For people like him, their personal life and death was not as important as the glory and prosperity of a dynasty. If you want to kill me, you will have to pay a great price. The older Qi cultivator smiled, looked at Feng Xiang and said, "You should know that since I have come here, it is not just a simple probe. The Deer Mountain Conference is near. Your emperor does not need a general who cannot express his power, but the support of you at your peak. So it is not a matter of whether you let me leave, but whether I let you leave." Feng Xiang nodded. Looking at this Qi cultivator who did not fear death, he said coolly, "Your words are reasonable, but you are wrong about one thing. In order to keep you here, I may not have to act." This Qi cultivator suddenly sensed something and looked in disbelief at the mountain path behind Feng Xiang. Feng Xiang arrived through the air in just an instant. However, the carriage that carried him had already appeared on the mountain path not far behind Feng Xiang. The eyes of the two gray horses were burning with a blood-like brilliance, and their hooves were also burning with blood-red flames. What was most astounding was the carriage they were dragging. There were countless black insects on the two wheels of the carriage. The wings of these black insects flapped astoundingly, and the power they carried was enough to support the weight of the entire carriage. The entire carriage seemed to be floating in the air, flying several feet above the ground. Unusual goo path. The older Qi cultivator looked at this scene. He finally sensed that the power that caused the carriage to change like this came from the carriage driver sitting on the carriage. The young cultivator, who was sitting on the broken wood, suddenly cried out in pain. He looked in terror as his chest suddenly split open like a watermelon. A dark red insect flew out of the open flesh and charged towards the back of the older Qi cultivator like a flying sword. The older cultivator of Qi took a deep breath. As he inhaled, countless strands of black energy visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared in the air around him. The black energy surged into his body, but his body did not swell because of this. Instead, it became even more compact. His flesh and blood contracted, turning black like iron and wrapping tightly around his bones. There was a muffled sound. The dark red insect hit his back. His body did not move at all, but the dark red insect that contained the true power of the flying sword turned to dust. It was also at this time that the two gray horses that had already mutated let out a neigh, and the entire carriage swept over his head. There was an explosion in the air. The black whip in the hand of the carriage driver suddenly fell down and wrapped around the older Qi cultivator. The black energy around the Qi cultivator shook, and the black whip immediately split into countless pieces. But this Qi cultivator's pupils contracted violently. He saw that each piece of the broken black whip was a finger-long black worm. Corpse-eating demonic insects. The Qi cultivator recognized these black insects, but he did not have time to react. Dozens of these black insects jumped on his body that was harder than iron. In a flash, countless holes appeared on his body, and primal energies of the universe surged out along with roiling black energy. He looked in disbelief at the holes on his body and slowly fell forward. Feng Xiang's body flew up and landed on the carriage. A genius who reached Realm 6 at such a young age, and a Realm 7 Grandmaster. Does the Qi dynasty really have so many powerful cultivators? He said coldly to himself as he entered the carriage. Chapter 174. The black-winged insects attached to the wheels of the carriage flew up, gathered together, and flowed into the sleeves of the carriage driver. The carriage wheels landed on the ground again, stirring up dust. The two gray horses turned back to their original appearance and continued to gallop forward. The driver did not slow down to inspect the corpses of the two Qi cultivators. Moments later, the bodies of the two Qi cultivators started to rapidly rot. Even the remnants of their clothing turned to black water and seeped into the ground. The surrounding forest was deathly silent. All living things within 1,000 feet were dead. Yet, not long after the carriage disappeared into the forest, a thread of black smoke slowly came out of the forest. The faint black energy grew thicker and slowly formed a black shadow. This was a silent middle-aged man dressed in black robes. His black hair that reached the ground was divided into 3 bundles behind his back. He sensed the sword essence still spreading in the air as he slowly walked through the ground that Feng Xiang's golden dragon had passed through. In a flash, he seemed to touch some of the paths of this sword. Light flashed fiercely in his pitch-black eyes that had almost no white. Then he bowed deeply, solemnly towards the place where the 2 Qi cultivators had died. He said softly, "For the Qi." There were still more than 20 days until the Deer Mountain Conference, but the 4 most noble emperors of the world were coming to Deer Mountain in person. This kind of battle and probing had naturally started long ago. A middle-aged man dressed like an ordinary scholar, but his presence was one with the surrounding forest. His cultivation was clearly extraordinary as he came to the foot of a mountain. This mountain was located opposite Deer Mountain and was one of the shorter of the dozen mountains opposite Deer Mountain. While it was short, one could clearly sense the direction of the powerful primal energies of the universe at the peak of Deer Mountain during the Deer Mountain Conference. Also, it was the shortest, so there would naturally be fewer people interested. However, when he arrived at the foot of this mountain, the middle-aged scholar's expression changed drastically, and he stopped in his tracks. At the foot of this mountain, where the forest and shrubbery met, there was a faint sword mark. This sword mark had only cut through the moss on the ground and did not even go deep into the soil. But in his eyes, it was like an insurmountable wall. This faint sword mark twisted and extended for an unknown number of miles. It was endless, and it completely circled around the foot of the mountain. However, this sword mark did not stop at all. It was completely like someone had swung a sword. This sword naturally moved forward along the intersection between the forest and the shrubs, separating the 2. There were countless large and minuscule twists and turns here, but this person had just swung a sword. This middle-aged scholar did not know what kind of grandmaster was able to use such a sword. He had never seen such a powerful cultivation, but he knew this grandmaster had left this sword mark to tell everyone that he had taken over this mountain. The middle-aged scholar started to retreat. He looked up, filled with awe. The Deer Mountain Conference had not started, but he saw a tall mountain he had never seen before. Relying on the reform and the support of many peerless cultivators, the Yuanwu Emperor had weakened the power of all the old nobility and destroyed 3 dynasties. But in the bloody storm that followed, countless cultivators of the Qin dynasty had died, and many powerful armies had died. Even the Bazin Kendo ground that had almost become the top sect in the world had disappeared in the river of history. Taking the chance of great losses, the Chu dynasty defeated the Qin army and had the Qin cut off Yangshan commandery. In order to avoid years of endless war, the 4 strongest dynasties in the world signed a non-aggression pact. They would meet again at Deer Mountain in 9 years. The reason was that while the Qin dynasty had lost in the war against the Chu, Yan, and Qi still formed an alliance because the stunning cultivators of the Qin dynasty had killed many people. The political situation of the Qin dynasty was stable. The Yuanwu emperor, the empress, and the 2 ministers formed a stable triangle. They had an unprecedented control over the Qin dynasty. So even if they did not feel great fear, at least the other 3 powerful dynasties in the world were deeply wary of the Qin dynasty. In the history of the Qin dynasty, and even some of the previous dynasties, there had never been a formal conference where the result was uncertain and everything still needed to be negotiated. So just like Zhang Yi said, there were no examples that could be used as reference. No one knew what would happen and how many hidden grandmasters would appear around Deer Mountain. A caravan of at least a dozen carriages was slowly moving towards Deer Mountain. These carriages looked ordinary on the outside, but the walls of the carriages were carved with complicated and indescribable seal scripts. The light from these seal scripts formed a thin layer of light on the walls of the carriages, but no primal energies of the universe came out. Most of the cultivators inside were young, and the pride between their brows could not be described with words. Another unique charm was that their bodies seemed exceptionally light and ethereal, like white clouds that would float into the sky at any moment. At a bend in the road, in one of the carriages in the middle of the caravan, a young youth around 13 or 14 years old lifted the curtain slightly. He looked at the 3 black carriages dozens of miles behind him and said softly to a youth who looked 2 years older than him, "Those 3 carriages have been following us since Chongling." The youth who was 2 years older than him had a delicate and pretty oval-shaped face that was as smooth as jade. His hair was casually tied up with a cloth band, but there were clouds and mist rising between the strands of hair, making his black hair look like a black mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. "Ignore them." He smiled disdainfully and said, "Since they've followed us since Chongling, there will not be any problems. At most, they are sects and families that are not powerful enough and want to use us to clear the way to avoid causing trouble along the way." Of the 3 carriages the 2 youths spoke of, Ding Ning and Fu Su were sitting in the last one. The black carriage they were in looked ordinary on the outside, but the cabin was very spacious and covered in precious and soft fur. Even though the road was bumpy, the softness of the fur was comfortable. For cultivators, carriages like this were mobile homes and places to cultivate. But the horses pulling the carriages needed to rest and be changed. The food and water stored in the first carriage also needed to be replaced. The 3 carriages they were in followed the caravan ahead. When they were about to reach a city, Forefather Zhou's voice came from the middle carriage. "Rest in the city tonight. This is Luoyang County of Guangzhou. This place is not far from my junior sect brother Xinyi's home." Ding Ning looked at Fu Su in a good mood as they walked on the last stretch of the wilderness near the city. Fu Su had never left Chongling since he was born. Looking at the scenery that was completely different from Chongling and thinking that this vast land belonged to the Qin dynasty, he felt even happier. So he smiled slightly and said softly, "This is closer to Sierra's home." Ding Ning frowned slightly and said, "Yes." Fu Su glanced at him and shook his head. He said, "You are really boring. You can't even make people talk." Ding Ning also looked at him and shook his head. "You are the one joking about this." Fu Su was still not satisfied. He said, "What is not good about Sierra?" Ding Ning said calmly, "It is my fault." Fu Su stilled slightly. He thought of Ding Ning's condition that all cultivators in Chongling should know. He felt slightly bitter. Many breaths later, he comforted, "There will be a way." Ding Ning nodded and said, "There may be a way, but I have to hurry." Fu Su naturally could not understand Ding Ning's true thoughts. He thought and said, "You are right. You know what is important better than me." While they were talking, the carriage had already entered the streets of the county and finally stopped in front of an inn. Just as he stepped off the carriage, Ding Ning's body froze slightly. Fu Su naturally discovered his abnormality and looked in the direction he was facing. He also stilled. Coincidentally, a carriage stopped under a tree at the entrance of the inn. A tall and beautiful young lady walked out of the carriage. She happened to see Ding Ning, and her whole body froze. "Is this Sierra?" After a breath, Fu Su reacted and said softly in disbelief, "There are such coincidences in the world. Why are you here?" The tall and beautiful girl seemed to be a little hesitant, but she still took the initiative to come forward and asked. Ding Ning took a deep breath. Looking at Sierra's expression, he knew this was really a coincidence. There really was such a coincidence. He did not answer Sierra's question, but looked at her trembling eyelashes and asked softly, "What are you doing here?" Chapter 175. Coincidences often hid many things that could be investigated. The Xie family was a wealthy family in Guangzhou. As the eldest daughter, Xie Ro had always been half a manager of the Xie family. She had also been active in Chongling. She would not appear in a small town like this if there was nothing special. Xie Ro hesitated slightly. Ding Ning was silent for a moment. Then he looked at her and said softly, "Not because of me?" Xie Ro stilled, and then she understood Ding Ning's meaning. Her white face blushed slightly. She hurriedly shook her head and said, "It is not because I swore an oath in Chongling that I was punished to return to Guangzhou. But there are some matters at home." Ding Ning nodded calmly and said, "I just happened to pass by here. We have to hurry on our way later, so let's part ways here." Xie looked at Ding Ning's calm eyes. Her red lips parted slightly, but she did not know what to say. She looked at Ding Ning turn around and his back. She did not know what to feel, like drinking a cup of cold water on a cold day. So simple? Fu Su frowned as he looked at Ding Ning, who was walking back, and asked softly. Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "What else? You want her to come with us to Deer Mountain?" Fu Su looked at his features and saw that Ding Ning did not look like he was joking. He could not help but shake his head and sigh. He said, "I still hope that you can find a solution to your body as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be a pity for a marriage." Ding Ning ended this conversation in silence. This young person is really good. A voice of praise passed into Xia Rou's ears from behind her. "Father?" Xia Rou turned around in shock. Behind her stood a short and stout merchant in a purple-red brocade robe. This short and stout merchant wore a large gemstone square ring and a jade belt around his waist. Whether it was the accessories on his body or the patterns on his purple-red brocade robe, they all appeared very tacky. His face was also fat and slightly red, appearing very tacky. Looking at the shocked Xia Rou, this tacky middle-aged merchant grinned and repeated with a thick Guangzhong accent, "This young person is really not bad." A faint blush appeared on Xia Rou's face once again as she said, "Just now, I've only said a few short sentences to him. You might not even have heard the content of our conversation. Why would you suddenly have such an evaluation? Just by looking at the way he handles things, you can tell whether he is a capable person or not." The stout merchant looked at her with satisfaction and said, "He clearly wants to reject you and deliberately keep a distance from you. However, there are many ways to reject you, but he chose the most appropriate and kindest way." Xia Rou looked at him in confusion. The stout merchant smiled slightly and explained, "He used the calmest and most ordinary method. This kind of method is not intense at all and will not cause great emotional fluctuations in you. He really wants you to forget him and not have any entanglements with him. Now, everyone knows that there is a problem with his body. He should know that the Xie family should be able to help him, but he still treats you like this. Regardless of whether it is because he does not want to burden you or because he has no time to consider romantic matters, this means that this youth is kind-hearted and has a true personality." After a slight pause, he looked at Xia Rou and said, "Also, I heard that the rise of Two-Level Tower, the leader of Chongling's marketplace, is largely due to him. Looking at the way he handles things, if the Xie family really has a son-in-law like this, I fear that he will handle some major matters better than me." This stout merchant was naturally Xia Rou's father, Xie Lianying. In the rumors, Xie Lianying was a tacky and smelly country bumpkin merchant. His name was often called Lian Sheng. Also, he seemed to feel that this was not enough and named his son Chong Sheng. His accomplishments today were all due to the foresight of his wife, the young lady from the Zhongshan family of the former Wei dynasty. But the words he said to Xia Rou right now were enough to prove that he was very different from the tacky merchants of the legends. Actually, even if you swear to marry no one but him and decide to keep this oath, you do not need to lower yourself. Xie Lianying looked at the silent Xia Rou and said, "Think about it. From the previous dynasty to now, there were so many stunning people. Which of the women by their side was not a strong helper who could stand shoulder to shoulder with them?" Xia Rou's body shook slightly. She took a deep breath and looked up at Xie Lianying. She said, "Father, what do you think I should do? Do not think about the oath. If you meet, do not lower yourself and pursue him. You only need to be spectacular. You only need to be more spectacular than the women who appear by his side, and more suitable to be his partner in battle. Then his gaze will not land on anyone else." Xie Lianying looked at her and said, "This is like how we do not do business now, but if we do in the future, we will naturally choose the best in that business." A bright flame appeared in Xia Rou's eyes. It is not appropriate to use business as an analogy for your daughter. Although she rebuked her father, her mood clearly improved. Her furrowed brows completely relaxed. She asked softly, "Is that matter ready?" Xie Lianying's expression was cold. He said, "This time, the Qin family will not be able to bear the consequences." Xia Rou nodded, but she was inexplicably hesitant. Xie Lianying could tell what she was thinking. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. In any case, he is the son-in-law that I have chosen and agreed to. After he passes through here, I will naturally take care of him. I will send people to see what he wants to do." Xiao immediately relaxed. She said with a serious expression, "Then shall we set off now?" Xia Lianying nodded and pretended to sigh sadly. He said, "A grown girl cannot be kept at home. Are you not even going to thank me for my performance?" Xiao immediately rolled her eyes at him and said, "If you want me to massage your shoulders, just say so." Xia Lianying immediately laughed. He moved his shoulders and said, "I've been too busy recently. The places where my shoulders were strained are a little stiff. After we finish the business, you really have to help me massage them." There was a stone bridge near the inn where the carriage stopped. There was a noodle shop under the bridge. "Do you want to eat noodles? I will treat you." Ding Ning looked at the noodle shop and turned to say to Fu Su, "The noodle shop in Falling Parasol is not bad, especially the noodles with pickled vegetables and intestines, and the noodles with pork and cabbage and red soup are the best." Fu Su nodded and said with a smile, "I do not have such heavy tastes like you. I only want egg noodle soup." "Do not go. Get on the carriage. We will depart." At this time, a warm voice reached their ears. Ding Ning's gaze focused slightly. He turned to look at the carriage where the voice came from and said, "Forefathers?" In the carriage, Forefather Zhou's cold gaze flashed, but his voice was still warm. "The Xie family is the wealthiest family in Guangzhou. Since that young woman is the eldest daughter of the Xie family, Xiao, something must have happened for her to appear here. Even if you do not want to have anything to do with her if she is in trouble, you should help if you can." Ding Ning's brow furrowed slightly. Of course, he knew that Forefather Zhou would not be so kind. But Forefather Zhou said so, and with his current attitude, he could not refuse. Strange. Xia Lianying lifted the curtain a sliver and looked at the 3 black carriages in the distance. He turned to Xiao and said, "Ding Ning's carriage is following." Xiao said, "This does not seem like his conduct." Xia Lianying thought, and said, "It seems to be related to the people he is following." Xiao looked at him and said softly, "Those people do not seem to be from White Goat Cave." Xia Lianying smiled faintly and said, "No matter. Regardless of who he is following from Chongling, at least they are not our enemies. It is best if some important person from Chongling is present to bear witness to what we are doing today. It seems that the Xie family is doing something important." Fu Su also lifted the curtain and looked at the Xie family caravan. There were only 6 carriages in the Xie family's convoy. This was a small display for the Xie family, but he noticed that these carriages didn't come together at the beginning. Instead, they drove out from different corners of the county and finally converged into a single convoy. Ding Ning was silent, but his brow furrowed deeply. They were clearly carefully concealing something. Xiao did not hide her tracks, but the carriages that followed her had appeared in such a way. It could only mean that the place where the Xie family needed to do things was not far from here, and the things in the carriages were obviously very important to the Xie family. Then what was in the carriages? But compared to what the Xie family was about to do, Forefather Zhou's interference made him more worried. The Zhou family was an old power of Chongling, but what they lacked now is money. The Xie family had what the Zhou family needed the most. His relationship with Xiao had already been used by Forefather Zhou. Chapter 176. Guangzhou was 800 miles of flat land. Outside the county seat of Luyang were large tracts of farmland. Occasionally, there would be low hills dotted with villages. Everywhere looked like a beautiful painting. The Xie family caravan moved unhurriedly and gradually slowed when they were 30 miles from the county seat. What does this mean? Seeing the Xie family caravan slow down, Fu Su frowned in thought. At this time, both sides of the road were some dry fields and uncultivated wastelands. There were no villages either. There was only a small horse farm by a small river not far away. There were only a dozen horses scattered on the grassy slope, nibbling on the green sprouts. No matter how he looked, there was no one in the surroundings who could trade with the Xie family. They have completely slowed down but not stopped. This means that this is where they are going to do business, but they have not arrived yet, Ding Ning turned to look at Fu Su and said slowly. Forefather Zhou narrowed his eyes slightly as though he was dozing off, but his thoughts were extremely active. Suddenly, his ears moved slightly, as though he heard something. Horse bandits. After a few breaths, Ding Ning took a deep breath and said to Fu Su, Horse bandits? Fu Su was shocked and slightly puzzled, but he immediately felt the tremors from the carriage wheels to the bottom of the carriage. He immediately reacted and frowned deeply. The Qin dynasty's Guanzhong was 800 miles of flat land. There were no badlands or rivers where even an army could not catch up. But the lack of mountain kings did not mean that there were no bandits. This kind of flat land gave rise to horse bandits. Horse bandits usually had 3 or 4 horses and never stayed in one place for long. They set up camp in different places each day. For the Qin dynasty, horse bandits that did not produce and only destroyed were true locusts. They were hated by the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty had guerrilla cavalry in the Guanzhong area that specialized in hunting down horse bandits. Elite cavalry were hard to train, but these kinds of horse bandits were easy to form. Usually, after one group was killed, 2 more would appear. It was impossible to kill them all. In the distant dry land, a column of mud and smoke suddenly appeared. Moments later, a group of horse bandits appeared in Ding Ning and Fu Su's sight. There were more than 100 people in this group of horse bandits, and each of them had at least 4 horses with them. Other than the horse that they were riding and the other horse beside them, the rest of the horses were carrying loads. Not only were the loads wrapped in cloth, but even the horses' bodies were stained with dried black blood. All the bandits were dressed in different clothing and wore yellow masks. Even though their figures were not as upright and cold as the cavalry of Great Qin, they had a cruel and bloodthirsty aura that was constantly emanating from their bodies. Ding Ning's gaze grew even colder. In terms of numbers, these horse bandits were not much. Powerful horse bandits usually had more than 1,000 riders and thousands of horses. They had the ability to fight against small groups of cavalry and cultivators. But from the height of the dust kicked up by the hooves of the horse bandits, he could judge that these horses were carrying extraordinary loads. It was normal for a merchant caravan to carry more goods, but for horse bandits, the extra weight was a matter of life and death. The Xie family had only sent a few carriages carrying people, and each carriage clearly had passengers. They could not carry all the extra weight of these horse bandits. To Ding Ning, this was a sign of danger. These horse bandits seemed to be carrying heavy loads. At this time, Fu Su turned his head and looked at him seriously. He said softly, "And they do not look large. They may be seal weapons or military equipment." Ding Ning was the most important imperial son of the Yuanwu emperor and the empress. He had been taught from a young age, so he could make such a judgment. He nodded. These horse bandits do not seem to have come to trade, but to fight. Even the drivers of these 3 carriages are not ordinary people. In the Xie family carriage, Xie Lianying did not pay much attention to the horse bandits carrying the dragon of dust. He paid more attention to the 3 black carriages following behind them. Looking at the calm state of the 3 carriages, a relaxed smile appeared on Xie Lianying's fat and oily face. Even the driver has a calm presence. This important person of Chongling must be of high status. Let's go out. In the next moment, his smile disappeared and a rare layer of coldness appeared. Do not waste the time of this important person of Chongling. The horse bandits suddenly stopped when they were hundreds of feet away from the Xie family carriages and silently formed a line. Under the control of these horse bandits, regardless of whether it was the horses they were riding or the saddled horses, all of them came to a halt. Dust swirled under the hooves of the horses, as if they were burning fiercely. However, the hooves and riders on the horses were already as silent as a forest, giving off a mountain-like pressure. A white-haired horse bandit controlled his horse to slowly walk out. Seeing Xie Lianying and Xie Ro walk out of the carriage, a thread of light flashed through his dim eyes. Then his gaze landed on the 3 black carriages of the Zhou family in the distance. His brow imperceptibly furrowed. "Where are our people and goods?" Seeing this horse bandit walk out, Xie Lianying, who had also walked to the front of the carriages, smiled slightly and spoke first. The white-haired horse bandit looked calmly at him and maintained his silence, without any other expression. The cloud of dust behind them slowly dissipated. Dozens of horse bandits stopped in the distance and slowly appeared in everyone's sight. The horse bandits formed a small circle. There were more than a dozen riders in the circle, who were clearly dressed differently from them. "Your people know where your goods are," the white-haired horse bandit said calmly. Only now did the white-haired horse bandit leader speak calmly. "Your people have seen it. You should let us see what we want." Xie Lianying nodded. His expression did not change, but his tone suddenly became disdainful. "I really admire your courage. You even dare to rob our people. Do you really think the Xie family can be touched by anyone in Guangzhou?" The white-haired horse bandit leader frowned deeply. He heard many unusual meanings from Xie Lianying's words, but he did not say anything. His left hand left the reins and was about to raise. "Do not think of killing one of my people to threaten me." Xie Lianying's eyes narrowed, and he said disdainfully, "See what I have brought you." As he spoke, the carriage drivers of two of the carriages in the Xie family carriages lifted the curtains of their carriages at the same time. The white-haired horse bandit leader's body suddenly froze. There was only one passenger in each of the two carriages. One was an old woman with white hair, and the other was a child of 5 or 6 years old. Xie Lianying looked at the horse bandit leader, who suddenly froze and said with thick disdain, "How about it? Is what I showed you enough? My people, starting from now, you can kill them as you wish." In the next breath, this extremely vulgar-looking merchant's expression changed. He sneered, "But as long as you kill one, I will make your Qin clan have no elders and no juniors." Ding Ning and Fu Su had been trying to listen to the conversation between Xie Lianying and the horse bandit leader. Fortunately, their voices were not soft, so they could hear clearly. Although they couldn't see what was in the two carriages of the Xie family, they quickly realized what was going on from Xie Lianying's words. These are not true horse bandits, or rather, they have other identities. Fu Su turned to look at Ding Ning and said softly, "They robbed the Xie family's people and goods, but they had not expected the Xie family to find out about them and rob their people." The horse bandit leader breathed deeply and maintained his silence. At this time, Xie Lianying continued to speak. Xie Lianying looked sympathetically at the horse bandit leader and shook his head. He said, "While the Xie family cannot compare to the true noble families of Chongling, we have been in Guangzhou for more than 50 years and have seen all kinds of storms. You children, do you think you can replace the Xie family with such tactics? It is fine if you want to act against the Xie family." Xie Lianying's tone suddenly turned harsh, and a layer of frost covered his oily face. "But you should know what the Xie family is escorting. You are also Qin people. How can you do such a thing?" Hearing Xie Lianying's words, the horse bandit leader slowly shook his head. His dim yellow eyes showed a kind of helplessness and emotion. Then he took off the yellow cloth covering his face. Under the yellow cloth was a slightly pale and thin face. "This son is unfilial and frightened you." This thin and white-haired man bowed deeply to the old matriarch in the Xie family carriage. Then his expression recovered. He looked at Xie Lianying and said simply, "Changed people." Xie Lianying smiled coldly. He knew that from now on, these people could only become true horse bandits. So he nodded and said, "Deal." The bandit leader took a deep breath. His left hand left the reins of a horse once again and lifted it up. But at this time, an indifferent voice sounded behind him. "I want to try." Chapter 177. This voice was indifferent, but very sharp. It sounded like a female voice at first, but it was slightly different from a female voice. Xie Lianying's brow imperceptibly furrowed. The white-haired bandit leader was the patriarch of the Guangzhou Qin family, Chen Tuanyun. The Qin family was a rising star of Guangzhou and had fought with the Xie family in business. It was not surprising that they would do something like this. If the Xie family could not resolve this matter, the Xie family would suffer great losses in the future. But Chen Tuanyun was famed for his filial piety, and he had a son at an old age. In his mind, his mother and the only son of the Qin family were likely more important than his own life. Now that he had decided to switch, who in the Qin family could raise objections? Chen Tuanyun abruptly turned around. The person who had spoken was not far behind him, riding a gray horse. Their clothing was also gray, and their figure was small. Their face was covered with a yellow cloth, and it was impossible to tell if they were male or female. I want to try. Looking at Chen Tuanyun, who had turned to look at him, this person spoke again, in an even sharper voice. Chen Tuanyun's hands trembled slightly. His face was as pale as paper. He begged in an almost inaudible voice, "Official, you are a small family. How can you compare to the country? Also, I may not fail, and may not harm your family at all." The gray-robed person's gaze was gentle, but his tone was indescribably determined and gave off an irresistible presence. Chen Tuanyun's chest rose and fell violently. He wanted to say something, but the gray-robed person's gaze suddenly turned harsh. He said in a cold voice, "Official Chen, do not forget your identity. Do not forget you are not from the Qin." Chen Tuanyun's chest felt like it had been hit by a hammer. He gritted his teeth and turned around. Xie Lianying had not spoken until Chen Tuanyun turned around. He looked deeply at Chen Tuanyun and said, emphasizing each word, "You should have heard of me. What I, Xie Lianying, hate the most is people going back on their word when doing business." Just as his voice rang out, two short and rapid whistles suddenly appeared in the air. Two sword lights, one red and one blue, suddenly appeared in the two carriages with the curtains raised, and passed through the old woman and the child. Blood spurted out as two pieces of flesh separated from the old woman's and the child's bodies, flying out of the carriage. The old woman and the child's bodies trembled violently, as if they were using all their strength to howl miserably, but for some reason, they couldn't make any sound. This silent scene was even more frightening. Xie Lianying. Chen Tuanyun immediately roared like an injured beast, his expression uglier than if he were crying. Isn't that a little inappropriate? Fu Su's face was also very pale. Although he could not see the scene in the carriage, he could guess what had happened. It's not good, but it's not what the Xie family expected. Ding Ning's expression was cold. His gaze remained on the gray-robed person with a sharp voice behind Chen Tuanyun. If I am not wrong, the only person who can force the patriarch of the Qin family to change his mind is a powerful cultivator above Realm 7. This Realm 7 cultivator must have confirmed that there were no Realm 7s in the Xie family caravan, so he stopped the Qin family from switching. He either wants to use lightning to assassinate Xie Lianying, or he wants to use some method to steal the hostages of the Qin family. Xie Lianying is not as mediocre as the rumors say. He should have seen clearly now. If he cannot exert enough pressure on the other, then all of the Xie family members may die here. Ding Ning's voice grew colder. Also, the other does not want to obtain great benefits from the Xie family, but wants to kill all of the Xie family members here. Kill all of the Xie family members here? Fu Su's expression was shocked. The Xie family is the wealthiest in Guangzhou and one of the pillars of the Qin dynasty. They just robbed some of the Xie family members in exchange for astounding wealth, and will not disturb the imperial palace. But if these people of the Xie family are killed, it will cause a great commotion. Chongling will use all of its power to investigate. The Qin family disguised as bandits cannot hide. Why are they doing this? Ding Ning sneered and said, maybe from the start, their goal was to get rid of this pillar, or to disrupt what the Xie family is doing right now. Hearing this, Fu Su suddenly thought of a possibility, and his heart shook. At the same time, he grew even more nervous. If it was as Ding Ning said, that cultivator with the shrill voice was a Realm 7 existence, then Xie Lianying, Xie Rou, and the others were in great danger. While Chen Tuanyun was screaming and talking to Ding Ning, Xie Lianying's expression was cold. He looked coldly at Chen Tuanyun and said, I do not know what your intentions are, and I do not care what grandmasters are among you. But I can guarantee that my two attendants will not be stingy with their lives. No matter how fast the person behind you is, before they or I fall, the heads of your mother and your precious son will fall from their bodies. I will not give you any chance to choose. Xie Lianying paused and looked expressionlessly at the bandits surrounding the dozen Xie family members behind Chen Tuanyun. He said coldly, "If you do not release them in 3 breaths, what will fall from their bodies will not be a piece of flesh, but an arm."
No.
Chen Tuanyun's entire body was soaked in sweat, as if he had just been fished out of the water. He looked absent-mindedly at the 2 bleeding figures in the carriage. His right hand left the reins and lifted upwards. At this time, the thin gray-robed person not far behind him narrowed his eyes. A thin but exceptionally sharp aura was quickly released from his body. Chen Tuanyun's body was still trying to raise his right arm. However, his right arm could not be raised because his entire right arm was separated from his shoulder and fell to the ground. Chen Tuanyun had reacted when the gray-robed person's presence was released, but he was unable to stop the other from cutting off his arm. The moment his right arm was cut off, he finally counterattacked. A cry of despair came out of his mouth. A rainbow-like brilliance surged out of his left hand, slashing toward the gray-robed man behind him at an astonishing speed. There were still 2 horse gang members between him and the gray-robed man. However, these 2 horse gang members were not even touched by this rainbow-like brilliance. They let out shrill cries and flew backwards with the sound of countless bones breaking. This rainbow light gave off the unique presence of a life bond item, but seemed to be stronger than ordinary life bond items. There seemed to be stars flashing in the gray-robed person's eyes. This rainbow light was astoundingly fast, but in his eyes, it seemed to be very slow. When the 2 horse gang members in front of him were sent flying backward with their bones broken, he just stretched out his right hand unhurriedly. He wore a silver metal ring on his right thumb. When he reached out his hand, it was as if there was an endless mountain falling from the sky, instantly condensing into his silver metal ring. Streams of silver energy flowed out of the small seal scripts on the metal ring and covered his hand. His hand seemed to be covered in heavy mercury and then spread along his arm towards his body. There were no fancy movements. He used this silver hand to grab the rainbow-like brilliance that was coming towards him. The moment the silver palm and the rainbow light made contact, countless dazzling lights flashed through the gaps between the palm and the fingers. Terrifying forces were about to explode along with these lights, but in the next extremely small instant, these forces seemed to sink into water and penetrated into the viscous silver streams of energy. At this time, the silver plating had just covered half of this gray-robed person's body. Without any clear sound, countless slurry lines suddenly shot out from the edges of the silver plating, as if countless silver flowers suddenly bloomed on the other half of his body. At the same time, Chen Tuanyun's pupils contracted violently. With a muffled sound, his entire body seemed to have been crushed by an invisible giant. A cloud of blood mist sprayed out from his mouth. His entire body flew backward softly, giving people the feeling that he was a weightless kakin floating in the air. The rainbow light was firmly locked in place by the silver palm. The light quickly dimmed, revealing its true appearance. It was a 7-colored curved jade in the shape of a bull's horn. Ding Ning had been looking at the silver thumb ring and the rainbow brilliance. He had already figured out what these 2 items were, but he kept silent and didn't say anything. It is the silver Rakshasa ring and the worry-free horn. Fu Su's expression grew ugly. He said coldly, "They are from the Chu dynasty." The Chu dynasty was the best in forging, and the strongest seal weapons in the cultivation world all came from the Chu. The worry-free horn came from the Chu dynasty's worry-free palace and had disappeared from the Chu for many years. It was possible that it had ended up in another country, but the silver Rakshasa ring was the treasure of the Chu Silver Thread Workshop. The Silver Thread Workshop was called a workshop, but in reality, it was one of the top 10 cultivation places of the Chu dynasty. A secret treasure of a sect like this naturally could not end up in the hands of a cultivator from another dynasty. As a Chu person, you do not deserve to use the worry-free horn. This gray-robed cultivator did not seem to want to disguise his identity. Looking at Chen Tuanyun, who was no longer breathing in the air, he coldly shook his head and said, Chapter 178. The Qin family has had a foothold in Guangzhou since the last generation. I want to know why he is from the Chu. Xie Lianing looked at Qin Tuanyun, who had fallen to the ground and died. He asked in a sympathetic tone. The gray-robed cultivator said coolly, "The son is the son, but the mother is not the mother." Xie Lianing was slightly surprised and said, "Adopted?" The gray-robed cultivator did not refuse to answer his question and said coldly, "A Chu orphan was adopted by a kind mother in Guangzhou. She treats him as her own and naturally is grateful." Xie Lianing said disdainfully, "I think that the Chu orphan was able to enter the Qin family through your arrangements." The gray-robed cultivator raised an eyebrow. For him, this matter did not need to be explained. Xie Lianing sneered and said, "Everyone knows gratitude, much less the kind mother who raised them. It is normal for Qin Tuanyun to be filial to his mother. Even if you have ulterior motives, you can wait until he exchanges hostages. If you fail this time, next time, you will speak of righteousness, but in reality, you are just afraid that after he releases the hostages, we will flee. You will not be able to kill all of us and expose your scheme. You killed Qin Tuanyun for quick success. You are not even a grandmaster. You are worse than a dog." The gray-robed cultivator was not angry and said disdainfully, "Our failure is because we underestimated you and the Xie family's abilities. You are much stronger than others' judgment of you." The gray-robed cultivator looked up slightly and swept his cold gaze across everyone in the surroundings. In the end, his gaze landed on Xie Lianing. "But do not think about using words to cause internal strife among the people around me. You should know that since I have shown my strength, the people around me know that if anyone wants to attack me, they will immediately die." Xie Lianing did not speak and narrowed his eyes slightly. While he was fat, he was like a tiger that had just woken up. "I will not kill those people. They will stay here. I think that you will not leave them behind and run." The gray-robed cultivator turned slightly and pointed at the dozen or so members of the Xie family who were surrounded in the distance. Then his figure moved slightly, and he floated down from his horse. He began to walk slowly towards the Xie family's convoy. At the same time, he looked at Xie Lianing and Xie Rou and said calmly, "Although I had no choice but to kill Qin Tuanyun, it has become extremely simple now. Either your Xie family has enough strength to kill me, or you will be killed by me." Hearing these words, Xie Rou's heart was filled with an unknown emotion. She unconsciously turned her head to look at the 3 black carriages behind her. Ding Ning suddenly became nervous. His gaze was locked onto Xie Lianing and Xie Rou. This small movement caused him to realize that while the Xie family had prepared in order to make the Qin family lower their guard, the Xie family most likely did not send anyone above Realm 7. The Xie family most likely had not expected such a powerful cultivator from the Chu dynasty among these disguised bandits. In other words, the Xie family may not have the ability to match this Chu dynasty cultivator. Forefather Zhou should be a powerful enemy of this Chu dynasty cultivator. He should want to use this opportunity to form a relationship with the Xie family. But this Chu dynasty cultivator had expressed his desire to try. This meant that this Chu cultivator may have the ability to instantly assassinate an opponent from a great distance. If so, then even Forefather Zhou may not be able to make it in time. Also, he was almost certain that Forefather Zhou would not act quickly. Forefather Zhou may not be able to escape unscathed against a cultivator like this. Even if Forefather Zhou could defeat this Chu cultivator without being wounded, with his understanding of Forefather Zhou, he would not act before the Xie family used all their power. He would wait until the Xie family was in dire straits and the situation was extremely dangerous before he acted. Even if he was not wounded, he would pretend to be seriously wounded when fighting this Chu dynasty cultivator. This way, the Xie family would feel that they owed him more favors. Ding Ning was even certain that he would only act after Xie Lianing died. Xie Lianing had already shown great adaptability and judgment that outsiders could not imagine. Compared to Xie Lianing, someone as inexperienced as Xie Rou was easier to deceive and control. When Xie Rou turned to look at the 3 black carriages Ding Ning was in, the gray-robed cultivator of the Chu dynasty also glanced at the 3 black carriages in the distance. These three black carriages that had been following the Xie family caravan naturally entered his sight. But when he saw Xie look back, but the three black carriages did not move, the wariness in his eyes faded slightly. A wave of vital energy silently flowed down his feet. In the world of cultivators, life and death were only separated by a moment. Fu Su's breathing grew faster. He sensed that the carriages in front and behind him had not moved. He could not help but open his mouth, wanting to make a sound. Ding Ning's eyes flashed. He had decided what he was going to do. The moment Fu Su opened his mouth, he shouted urgently at Fu Su, "Do not act rashly." Fu Su stilled. He did not understand why Ding Ning would shout like this. Even if he did not want to have any conflict with Xie, did he not even care about Xie's life? However, just as he was startled, he suddenly felt an erupting volcano beside him. With a boom, his eardrums rang. Before he could react, the vital energy in Ding Ning's body surged wildly. Ding Ning's body turned into a gust of wind as he surged out of the carriage. Two sharp sounds tore through the air at the same time. Two streaks of black sword light flew out from his fingertips, cutting through the harness on one of the horses pulling their carriage. Without the slightest hesitation, the tip of his foot tapped on the back of this horse. This horse cried out in pain, madly galloping forward with him. This series of actions flowed smoothly. By the time Fu Su understood that Ding Ning had only shouted for him to not move, the horse had already charged dozens of feet away with Ding Ning. The black carriage immediately tilted when one of the two horses pulling the carriage was lost. The Zhou family carriage driver at the front was an extraordinary cultivator. His figure was still steady, nailed to the front of the carriage like a nail. Yet, even he was unable to stop Ding Ning in time. He could only shout. What does he want to do? Fu Su looked at Ding Ning, who was charging towards the Xie family caravan. He could not understand what Ding Ning wanted to do. In his view, with Ding Ning's strength, charging like this was suicide. In the middle carriage, Forefather Zhou's expression suddenly darkened. He raised his hands slightly, and two terrifying auras seemed to be about to seep out from his arms. However, his eyes flashed, and he seemed to have thought of something. He only smiled coldly and placed his hands on his knees without saying a word. Since he did not speak, the three black carriages naturally did not move. Xie looked in shock at Ding Ning, who was charging over on his horse. She could not understand why Ding Ning was charging over alone or what effect he could have. Yet looking at Ding Ning's calm but burning eyes from a distance, the sound of hooves was like countless small hammers hitting her body. The gray-robed cultivator's figure stilled slightly. He had already attacked, but the two strange black sword lights when Ding Ning charged out of the carriage puzzled him. So he stopped. Ding Ning was not an ordinary cultivator. He was certain where the gray-robed cultivator's hesitation came from. Therefore, he immediately raised his hand. With a swoosh, another beam of black sword light shot out toward the sky in front of him. Ahead of him was the Xie family caravan and the gray-robed cultivator. Countless possibilities flashed through the gray-robed cultivator's mind when a black sword light tore through the air from such a distance. The names of countless powerful methods and sword manuals appeared in his mind. He could not help but look up, narrowing his eyes at this black sword light that seemed to melt under the sunlight. He feared some astounding change would occur to this black sword light. Yet as this black sword light came closer, he sensed that the power of this black sword light grew smaller, and it flew slower. Then he sensed a strong presence of annihilation and coldness. Star Fiend Gathering Method. He could not help but murmur to himself. His brow unconsciously furrowed. He was certain what kind of method this was, and that Ding Ning's cultivation was very weak compared to him. However, he felt vaguely uneasy. This young man who was galloping over on his horse seemed to be able to see through his thoughts and control the rhythm of this battle. Of course, he did not want anyone to control the rhythm of the battle. So he took a deep breath and stopped hesitating. Two streams of vital energy flowed into his feet. There were two light blue jade pieces in the soles of his shoes. These two light green jade pieces were so thin that they were completely transparent. They were not even as thick as a strand of hair. It was unknown what kind of method was used to cut and polish them. However, on such a thin jade surface, there were countless fine runes. Following the infusion of his two true essences, with a puff, two green pillars of light suddenly surged out from under his feet. His body disappeared in these two blue pillars of light. He truly disappeared, because at this moment his figure did not exist in the vision of the surrounding people at all. Chapter 179.
Flee.
Ding Ning only shouted one word because he only had time to shout one word. With this word, all the condensed fiendish sword chi accumulated in his body shot out from between his fingers. Streaks of black sword light instantly turned into a torrential rain, all striking towards a spot beside Xie Lianying's body. Whether it was his shout or the storm formed by the black sword lights, it was irresistible to Xie Lianying and Xiero. "Let's go!" A sharp light flashed in Xie Lianying's eyes. He pulled Xiero, who was beside him, back almost instinctively. A soft sound of surprise sounded. A faint indigo light suddenly appeared in the storm formed by the black sword lights. A silver flow appeared out of nowhere. Xiero's heart almost stopped as she retreated. While every cultivator knew that the Chu dynasty was the best in the world in terms of seal weapons, she had never heard of this gray-robed cultivator coming through the air like this. A silver flow first appeared clearly in the air, and then a gray figure. For this powerful cultivator of the Chu dynasty, the storm formed by Ding Ning forcing out all the fiendish swords in his body seemed light. The gray figure only turned slightly. Half of his body flashed with silver light, and straightened like a large silver sword. Streaks of black sword light exploded on the silver light, and black flowers bloomed in the air. The other half of this Chu dynasty cultivator's body also bloomed with silver flowers, but he only felt that half of his body was slightly cold. The difference between Realm 3 and Realm 7 was too great. Also, he had a seal weapon formed from the efforts of countless Chu cultivators and craftsmen. While this Chu dynasty cultivator could not understand how Ding Ning could sense his location, his gaze was still indifferent. He used normal speed to channel his vital energy into the worry-free horn in his hand. A wave of killing intent appeared in the air again. It was only because the heaven-earth yuan qi emitted from the worry-free horn was too colorful and bright that the killing intent gave people a carefree and bright feeling. It was easy for people to forget many sorrowful things, and even slow down their reactions. The Xie family was the wealthiest in Guangzhou, and the cultivators they brought were not ordinary people. The worry-free horn in this Chu dynasty cultivator's hand passed through the fragments of the fiendish swords and charged towards Xie Lianying, who was retreating. The two flying swords floating next to the old woman and child finally made the correct response. There was a loud bang. The red sword burned fiercely, giving off blinding light. While the sword was small, because of the power it gave off, it felt like an enormous ball of lava was erupting from the mouth of a volcano and smashing towards this Chu dynasty cultivator. The other indigo sword silently flew down and sank into the earth below. Even its presence became the same as the earth. This Chu dynasty cultivator frowned slightly, but the worry-free horn in his hand did not change at all. With a muffled clang, the oncoming red sword was forced to stop in the air by the powerful force. It couldn't even dodge and was sent flying backwards by the powerful force. All the flames that flowed out of the runes on the sword dissipated and fell into the surrounding grass. In an instant, the moisture in the grass was dried up and turned into dry grass. Then it was set ablaze. This Chu dynasty cultivator did not worry about where the sinister indigo sword went. For him, the indigo sword that had sunk into the earth would eventually come out of the earth and stab towards his body. If this small sword came out of the earth, he would be able to sense it and react in time. This was the absolute confidence that only cultivators above Realm 7 could have. The moment the small red sword was sent flying backwards, one of the Xie family carriages suddenly shook. With a muffled grunt, the carriage curtains flew outwards and some bloody foam sprayed out. But to this Chu dynasty cultivator's surprise, The indigo sword that had sunk into the earth seemed to have disappeared and did not appear. Because of his absolute confidence, this Chu dynasty cultivator did not slow down in his movements. Two surges of primal chi of heaven and earth surged out from under his feet. Two visible balls of light appeared under his feet. In the next moment, his entire body was thrown forward, and he continued to accelerate crazily. In half a breath, the worry-free horn in his hand gave off sharp murderousness and approached the retreating Xiaolianying and Xiero. An old shout came from the carriage behind Xiaolianying and Xiero. Inside the carriage sat an old scholar with white hair and a beard. As he shouted, his body seemed to be filled with countless holes, shooting out countless green gusts of wind. The hardwood carriage around him crumbled like a paper lantern, scattering outwards. The indigo wind beams twisted like they were alive and swept towards this Chu dynasty cultivator from all directions like the tales of fairies. This Chu dynasty cultivator had a disdainful expression. His body did not change, but his vital energy surged out more violently. The rainbow energy from the worry-free horn in his hand grew stronger. It did not seem to touch Xiaolianying and Xiero, but Xiaolianying and Xiero both grunted, and blood seeped out of the corners of their mouths. The old scholar's expression did not change, but his body seemed to be weightless. He floated up with the indigo wind beams and blocked in front of Xiaolianying and Xiero. The Chu cultivator's eyes suddenly focused. He suddenly sensed that there was a strange aura in these green gusts of wind. His body suddenly froze. From the beginning until now, there was finally a pause in his body. The pause was because of the eruption of even stronger energy. Primal energies of the universe gathered like mountains above his head and flooded into his silver Rakshasa thumb ring at an unimaginable speed for ordinary cultivators. The thick mercury-like energy that flowed out of the silver Rakshasa thumb ring immediately covered his entire body. Even his orifices were filled with silver energy, and he turned into a silver person. Almost all the indigo wind beams collapsed when they hit his body, but one indigo wind beam did not dissipate and gave off more and more of the light of crystal. The Chu cultivator sneered in disdain. Countless cracks quickly appeared on the green wind that had just bound his body and contracted violently. Inside the cracks, the layers of the chips could be clearly seen. The old scholar's body was still floating in the air, but his insides were shaking violently. Bright red blood gathered chaotic energy and sprayed out of his mouth and nose. A powerful presence unique to a life bond item came out of the crystal-like indigo wind beam. So this was not a wind beam made from primal energies of the universe, but the life bond item he cultivated. Life bond items were called life bond items because they had an inexplicable connection to the cultivator's life. If their life bond item was destroyed, they would be seriously injured at best and die at worst. Yet, this old scholar's life bond item was about to be destroyed, but he did not hesitate and squeezed out all the power he could control from his body without reservation. The cracked indigo life bond item was locked in a stalemate. At this time, in the last carriage, a young indigo-robed swordsman with determined eyes took a deep breath. The indigo flying sword he had hidden underground for a long time finally, silently, came out of the earth under the Chu cultivator's feet. The silver light on the Chu cultivator's face faded slightly. The yellow cloth covering his face fell off due to the rippling of energy. Behind the yellow scarf was a thin, fair, feminine face that looked a little like a woman's. A hint of disdain and pity flashed across his face. Other than that woman from the Zhongshan family, the Xie family is only so strong. When he said this, the worry-free horn in his hand had already been pulled back. It stuck close to his body and swept down from top to bottom. The rainbow-like light slid down onto the green crystal bundles binding his body. The green crystal bundles shattered into countless pieces, and the old scholar floating in the air fell to the ground, silently dying. He stepped forward. The rainbow-like light in his hand continued to fall and sweep under his feet. The end of the light accurately hit the indigo flying sword that had just come out of the earth. It seemed like a gentle exchange, but it was like two small mountains crashing into each other. there was an explosion. The indigo sword, no more than a foot long, plowed a deep trench in the ground like it was plowing the ground. The young indigo-robed swordsman sitting in the last carriage bowed his head in dejection. Countless blade-like wrinkles appeared on his smooth face, and blood flowed out of each wrinkle. The Chu cultivator proudly raised his head. In his view, no one in the Xie family could stop him from killing Xie Lianying and Xie Rou, and even the youth near Xie Lianying and Xie Rou. But at this time, he sensed an impossible surge of primal energies of the universe. He suddenly turned around, his eyes flashing with shock and disbelief. Chapter 180. His shock did not come from the power of the primal energies of the universe, but from the direction of the primal energies of the universe. The primal energies of the universe that suddenly appeared came from the carriage where the bleeding old woman was. There was only the old woman who had been cut in the carriage. In his perception, no one in the Xie family caravan could stop him from killing Xie Lianying and Xie Rou. Yet, to his surprise, this bleeding old woman was attacking him. The moment he turned around, the silver Rakshasa thumb ring on his hand once again sent out large amounts of mercury-like energy that covered his entire body. The old woman, who had lost a large chunk of flesh on her shoulder, half of her body dyed in blood, looked extremely miserable. However, right now, her expression was completely calm. Her palms were extended outwards. The carriage curtains in front of her, including half of the carriage, were already smashed to pieces by the abundant power. Many earthen yellow stars of light strangely and quickly appeared in the earth in front of her, forming two paths of light in front of her palms. These two earthen yellow paths of light were like extensions of her palms. With an unstoppable presence, they pressed hard on the Chu cultivator's body the moment he turned around. The Chu cultivator's silver brow furrowed deeply. With a low shout, the silver energy covering his body flew up like waves. His figure staggered slightly, the ground beneath his feet caving in, but his movements didn't slow down at all. The worry-free horn in his hand flew out like a flying sword, also sweeping towards the old woman's body at this time. With a soft pop, half of the old woman's body shattered, turning into bloody paste that flew backwards. However, at this moment, another strange aura appeared in the air. This aura came from the child, who also had blood flowing from his body. Because of the great loss of blood, this child's face was extremely pale, but his eyes were as black as ink, forming a strong contrast. The old woman was killed in one blow, half of her body turned to bloody paste. But his seemingly childish and pale face was extremely calm. A spinning black gold cone-shaped sword flew out of his blood-soaked sleeve and attacked the Chu cultivator's abdomen with astounding speed. The great Chu cultivator grunted as blood seeped out of his mouth and nose. The silver yuan qi on his body was almost completely dispersed. There were sounds of ripping and bones breaking where the dark gold cone-shaped small sword had struck. His body could no longer maintain its momentum. 3 balls of air waves splashed up from the ground, and his body was instantly pushed back by more than 30 meters. The small conical sword sank several inches into his flesh. The silver energy on his body disappeared. But in this moment, a surge of vital energy came out of his body and flooded into the silver Rakshasa ring on his hand. Mercury-like energy covered his hand. His hand came down and gripped the violently spinning black gold cone-shaped small sword. There was a muffled buzzing sound in the air, and a mist of blood gushed out from his waist. All of the consciousness and energy in the seal scripts of this black gold cone-shaped sword were forced out by him. In an instant, it became a dead object that had lost its vitality. The child slumped back against the carriage. The Chu cultivator coldly threw out the small sword. The small sword created a wild gust of wind and landed on the child's chest. The child's chest caved in. Flesh and blood flew out, and the caved-in area quickly turned into a transparent hole. The wooden planks of the carriage behind the young boy had been completely crushed by the powerful force. His organs had all disappeared, and he was about to die. However, in the moment before he died, he turned his head to look behind him. On his calm and cold face, there was a smile that said he had fulfilled his mission. In his last sight, Xie Lianying, Xie Rou, and Ding Ning had retreated to the front of the Zhou family's 3 black carriages. In the Xie family caravan, all of the cultivators were either dead or seriously injured. The shattered carriages and flesh flew everywhere. The situation looked terrible, but the Chu Dynasty Realm 7 expert who had caused this did not have a smug expression. He stopped and stood in this terrible scene. After a long moment of silence with his head bowed, he looked up and said, "Old Tong killed both of you, so from the start, you did not capture Qin Tuanyin's family." Ding Ning, Xie Lianying, and Xie Rou had also stopped. Xie Lianying took a deep breath. He met the Chu cultivator's gaze and nodded. He said, "You did not have enough time to capture the Qin family. You were only confused by your concern. In this situation, you will not have enough time to verify." A good plan. The Chu cultivator's breathing calmed, and he praised sincerely in a sharp voice. Qin Tuanyin died for nothing. Xie Lianying also grew silent. Just now, the Xie family cultivators were only able to stop this Chu cultivator a little. "How did you determine where I would land?" The Chu cultivator's gaze landed on Ding Ning. Even though he didn't know what kind of cultivators were hiding in those 3 black carriages, he understood extremely clearly that the reason Xie Lianying and Xie Rou were still alive was because this youth in front of him had accurately grasped the landing points of his 2 space leap talismans and immediately stopped his movements. Fu Su had flown out of the carriage and stood next to Ding Ning. Just now, in a few short moments, the battle of life and death surpassed anything he had seen in his usual cultivation. His body was still cold. Hearing the words of this Chu cultivator, he looked at Ding Ning with an incomprehensible gaze. He had the strongest parents in the world and the best teachers of the Qin dynasty. As a result, his cultivation progressed quickly, and he was exposed to many more things than ordinary cultivators. He knew that the flight seal could be tracked. It was a powerful flow of primal energies of the universe. The cultivator would appear to disappear in the air because the flow of primal energies of the universe was so fast that it surpassed the limits of the cultivator's eyes. But even if one knew that the enemy had such a seal weapon, in such a short time, it was usually impossible to determine where the other's primal energies of the universe would land. If the Space Leap Talisman was a bridge in the air, then the other fulcrum of the bridge was determined by the person who cast it. Ding Ning took a deep breath. Of course, he could not answer, but if he could not give a convincing reason, Forefather Zhou in the carriage behind him might be even more suspicious of him. So, in this moment, he looked up and calmly answered, "That place is least likely to be intercepted by the 2 flying swords." Fu Su stilled and did not immediately understand the meaning of the words. This Realm 7 expert of the Chu dynasty frowned again. He thought back to the scene just now and slowly said, "Just like that?" Ding Ning looked at him, nodded and said, "Just like that." Fu Su thought dazedly. Was it just because Xie Lianying and Xie Rou's bodies had coincidentally blocked the direction of the 2 flying swords behind them? "This one is Chun Chu of the Silver Thread Workshop." This Chu cultivator nodded, and then said calmly. His gaze landed behind Ding Ning on the black carriage where Forefather Zhou was. These words were clearly directed at Forefather Zhou. But Fu Su and Xie Lianying's gazes focused at the same time. I was wondering who it was. So it is the famed Silver Thread Divine Hand, Chun Chu. Xie Lianying sneered. And a powerful cultivator from the Chu court. It is my good fortune to meet him. Chun Chu was very famous. Only craftsmen who could reach the Silk Road level, who could accurately set up seal scripts on a hair-sized thread, could be called divine hands among the craftsmen of the Chu dynasty. There were only 5 divine hands in the Silver Thread Workshop. Chun Chu was not just a divine hand, he was also a Realm 7 expert. This was even rarer. He could create and use seal weapons that cultivators below Realm 7 could not comprehend. So he had become a court artificer a long time ago. However, Xie Lianying's sneer at this moment had other meanings. Many of the artificers of the Chu dynasty who stayed in the court had incomplete bodies. Chen Chu naturally sensed Lianying's mockery, but he did not pay any attention to it. He only faintly sensed a dangerous aura from within the black horse carriage. He had to obtain more information to decide if he should flee or continue to fight. Ding Ming's eyebrows rose slightly. At this time, the curtains to Forefather Zhou's carriage parted. Dressed in loose brocade robes, Forefather Zhou slowly stood up and walked out of the carriage. My surname is Zhou, and my name is Mei. Maybe it is a homonym of misfortune, so I have not been very lucky in this life. Forefather Zhou had a benevolent and amiable expression as he looked at this Chu court cultivator and spoke gently. So it is him. He is not dead yet. Xia Lianying reacted instantly, and a voice of disbelief rang out in his heart. I had not expected Forefather Zhou to still be alive. Old but strong. Chen Chu's eyes narrowed slightly, and his sharp voice sounded. His expression was also one of surprise. The present Chongling is not the Chongling of your time. Chen Chu paused slightly. He looked at Forefather Zhou and said coolly, Why do you have to interfere in a matter like this? Coincidentally encountering is an opportunity. Forefather Zhou looked amiably at Chen Chu and said, You have 2 good items. I want to give them to the young person next to me. Chapter 181. Chen Chu looked coolly at Forefather Zhou and said calmly, These 2 items are important treasures of the Chu dynasty. The 2 items Forefather Zhou spoke of were naturally the worry-free horn and the silver Rakshasa thumb ring on his body. But when he said these 2 items were important treasures of the Chu dynasty, he meant that he would bring these 2 items back to the Chu dynasty unless he died here. This was the same as what the swordsman of the Qin dynasty said. If the sword existed, the person existed. If the sword died, the person died. But when such a principle came from the mouth of a realm's 7 grandmaster, it had an unusual deterrent effect. An imperceptible greed flashed through Forefather Zhou's eyes. He smiled slightly and said, The result is that you will stay behind as well. Chen Chu did not say anything else. He took a deep breath. Ignoring the injuries from the battle just now, he forced his true essence to surge through his body. His somewhat pale face began to emit a strange flush, and his black hair began to be dyed with frost. A lively and powerful presence was injected into the worry-free horn in his hand. In the next moment, the air in front of him suddenly scattered. The grass and leaves on the ground were all turned to powder. The 7-colored worry-free horn smashed towards Forefather Zhou in a domineering manner. Forefather Zhou narrowed his eyes. Ever since the Yuanwu emperor had ascended the throne, he had never fought anyone. He felt unfamiliar with this suffocating pressure coming at him. Yet at the same time, he felt an itch in his bones. That feeling he had not felt for a long time was recovering. He stood where he was and raised his right hand slightly. With a crack, a black sword light flooded out of his fingers and accurately hit the worry-free horn. While it was the same method, the difference between his fiendish sword and Ding Ning's fiendish sword was like heaven and earth. Ding Ning's fiendish sword was only slightly crystalline on the surface, but his fiendish sword was like a black gem, shining with light, and even had a presence similar to the 9-Hell King sword. A crisp sound was heard. This small black sword shattered into countless tiny crystal particles, but the worry-free horn that was charging forward suddenly slowed down and froze in the air. In the next breath, it was actually sent flying backwards by the power of these crystal particles. Chen Chu's frown deepened, and the strange blush on his face became brighter and more intense. This was the first round of probing. In the eyes of all the spectators, the result was extremely unfavorable to him. Forefather Zhou's fiendish energy had accumulated in his body for a long time and had reached an unimaginable level. His vital energy gathered together with the power of the worry-free horn, and everyone could sense that he was forcefully channeling his vital energy despite his injuries. In a situation where his internal organs were damaged, this kind of forceful use of true essence would naturally cause greater damage to his body, making it impossible for him to fight for a long time. But how could a fight between Realm 7s be so simple? Sensing all the changes in Forefather Zhou's presence as the small black sword struck the worry-free horn, Qin Chu found a sliver of hope in this seemingly hopeless battle. He once again took a deep breath. In a short time, the space in front of him was sucked into a vacuum. His right hand reached out towards the worry-free horn. Everyone thought that he was going to grab the seal weapon that had been knocked back. But in this moment, the many purple glowing droplets in his energy that no one else could sense exploded out of his right hand along his meridians. When these glowing purple droplets charged out of his fingertip, they turned into a purple crescent moon in front of him. The instant this purple crescent moon bloomed in front of him, there was a rumbling sound in the sky above, as if a huge gap had been opened. An exceptionally bright pillar of light seemed to transcend the limits of time, falling from the sky and landing on the purple crescent moon in front of him. Everyone was shocked. "What is going on?" Xia Rou exclaimed in disbelief. This purple crescent moon was clearly the life bond item of this Realm 7 Grandmaster. In the previous battles, this Realm 7 Grandmaster had always used external items to fight, causing people to suspect that he had a life bond item. The sudden appearance of a life bond item had already caused people to be so nervous they could not breathe. But the power contained in the pillar of light falling from the sky seemed to far surpass the power of this life bond item. This scene of a sky opening and terrifying energy falling down was clearly the scene of Realm 8 Heaven opening realm in some records. Ding Ning's expression was calm as he calmed his mind and sensed. He knew very well that the reason for such a phenomenon was because Chun Chu's life item was a special practitioner weapon. The Chu seal weapons are the best in the world, but they're just using external items to borrow the surface of Realm 8. How can they truly have the presence of Realm 8? Forefather Zhou looked up at the bright pillar of light falling from the sky and shook his head in sympathy. The worry-free horn was sent flying by the power of the purple crescent moon. Chun Chu did not pay attention to the worry-free horn. His entire person had merged into one with the purple crescent moon. His body was lifted up by the power of the purple crescent moon. Together with the purple crescent moon, he arrived in front of Forefather Zhou with a boom. Ding Ning, Fu Su, Xia Lianing, Xia Rou, the two carriage drivers of the Zhou family, the carriage, and even Forefather Zhou's body were blown back by an unstoppable gust of wind. His loose robes were blown close to Forefather Zhou's body by the gust of wind, revealing his originally concealed figure. There was a large gap at the side of his waist. It was deep inside his body, but his lower abdomen was bulging. It gave people the feeling that the piece of flesh that had been cut off was piled up inside his lower abdomen. Forefather Zhou's expression was stern. His 10 fingers spread open. 10 thin black crystals appeared between his fingers, as if they were not real. However, they did not immediately turn into small swords. Instead, they floated in front of his hands. In the next moment, the sound of an enormous mountain moving came from the sky. Invisible primal energies of the universe flooded into his body and then furiously surged out of his skin along with his vital energy. The 10 thin black crystals merged with his vital energy and the terrifying amount of energy he had transported with his mountain-moving realm cultivation. They suddenly formed a black crescent moon. The black crescent moon gave off a terrifying presence of destruction and gave off black and white light. The surrounding world became pure black and white like ink garden. Everyone's body was bathed in black and white as though they had been dragged into an ink scroll. This was the strongest killing essence of the painting remnant scroll. While Forefather Zhou's comprehension of the painting remnant scroll was slightly off, and he did not completely understand the meaning of profit and loss, after hundreds of years of study, he had a complete grasp of this killing essence. This was why, even though his energy was frozen, Zhongsun Qianxue, who possessed the 9 Hell King sword, had said to Ding Ning that she was not certain of victory. The black and white light pierced the enormous pillar of light falling from the sky. The enormous pillar of light was also corroded by the black and white. The purple crescent moon quickly dimmed, and countless rust-like patterns appeared on its surface. His life bond item had been damaged to a certain extent. Chen Chu could not help but cough lightly. Crimson blood sprayed out of his nose and mouth. Beads of blood seeped out of his skin and made a hissing sound as though air was leaking out of his body. This was because the primal energies of the universe and vital energy in his body had reached their limits. Under the powerful impact, the primal energies of the universe in his meridian points were being squeezed out in threads. He knew that even if he won this battle, his cultivation would likely fall greatly in the future, and his injuries would be so serious that he would not be able to fight in the future. A hint of bitterness appeared at the corners of Chen Chu's mouth, but his eyes were determined and flashed with fanatical light. He reached out his hand again. Most of his vital energy flooded into the seal scripts of the silver Rakshasa thumb ring. A small but powerful silver flow of energy accurately charged into Forefather Zhou's body and into the empty space at his waist. This was the chance of victory he wanted at all costs. If such a powerful force charged into Forefather Zhou's old wounds, it would immediately tear apart all of Forefather Zhou's organs and destroy his energy sea. Even before death, Forefather Zhou would not be able to counterattack. Yet at this time, Chen Chu's body suddenly turned cold. He saw Forefather Zhou's eyes exude some smugness and pride. When that silver flow of energy charged into Forefather Zhou's body, it seemed to have charged into an empty space. To be more precise, this power of his had directly rushed into the sea of qi that had already been prepared there, like an open pocket. Even if ordinary people had a passage to their energy sea like this, if such a destructive power forced its way into the energy sea would be greatly damaged, and the cultivator would immediately die. Yet Forefather Zhou's body was like a frozen star space. Inside, it was filled with countless pieces of ice. The moment this silver flow of energy charged in, it was frozen. Chen Chu finally understood the situation inside Forefather Zhou's body and why Forefather Zhou was slower than him. But at this time, he did not have the time to react. Forefather Zhou's left hand gently pressed against his chest. Strange sounds sounded from inside his body. In the next moment, the flesh on his back was pierced by the countless broken bones that rushed out of his body, bringing with them countless puffs of bloody mist. Chapter 182. Chen Chu's bones were shattered, and his organs were crushed into mush. But to everyone's surprise, he did not immediately fall down and die. He still stood and looked with a strange gaze at Forefather Zhou's bulging belly. What meaning is there? He was the loser of this battle. As a grandmaster of the Chu dynasty, he was about to die on the land of the Qin dynasty. Yet when he looked at Forefather Zhou, his sharp voice contained a strange sympathy. These words were hard to understand, but Forefather Zhou knew the meaning in his words. Even his energy sea was frozen to such a state, his organs were so damaged, his body was so old. He would use up large amounts of natural treasures every day. Living was not a pleasure. What was the meaning in a person who should have died before Emperor Yuanwu ascended the throne, living until now with a damaged body? Because he understood, Forefather Zhou's expression grew dark. Even a withered tree can come back in spring, much less just one step away from the sky. He looked coldly at Chen Chu and said coldly, "A centipede dies, but does not fall down. You want to reach the sky?"
Chen Chu said mockingly.
His strange and sympathetic gaze landed on Fu Su and Ding Ning. Worms that are about to die and travel outside, their actions are naturally poisonous. You have to be careful. Forefather Zhou sneered and did not say anything. With a soft pop, the last thread of power supporting Chen Chu disappeared from his body. He collapsed to the ground. His limp body could not be compared to the realm's 7 grandmaster who had slaughtered the Xie family caravan. Ding Ning was silent and bowed his head slightly. Even if they were enemies, some people were worthy of respect. What do they want to do? Fu Su's gaze landed in the distance, on the dozen or so Xie family members who had been kidnapped. While the Xie family's plan had succeeded, and 2 cultivators disguised as Chun family women and children, successfully causing Qin Tunshan and this realm's 7 expert of the Chu dynasty to turn against each other, because they had not expected the Qin family to have such a realm 7 expert. The Xie family had paid a great price today. Of the 5 realm 5 cultivators in the caravan, 3 were dead and 2 were seriously injured. At this time, the 2 cultivators disguised as the Qin family women had been exposed and died. The Xie family had nothing to fear. In his view, the remaining Qin family members were likely to kill the dozen Xie family members who had been kidnapped. However, the members of the Qin family who had disguised themselves as mounted gangsters did not do so. Furthermore, they did not flee immediately. It seemed that they were just waiting. They want to talk. Ding Ning looked up at Fu Su and Xie Lianying, saying, Qin Tunshan is dead, but the Qin family still has many family members. They hope the Xie family can give them a way out. The key to doing business is to make money amicably, especially not to take the other's last bite. Xie Lianying nodded. He looked at Ding Ning with great satisfaction. He had seen countless young geniuses, but none of them satisfied him as much as Ding Ning. Who is in charge now? He took several steps forward, looking at the desolate and bleak figures of the Qin family members, and said calmly. A middle-aged man with an ordinary face and short hair got off his horse, took several steps forward, and bowed to Xie Lianying. Release our people, return our goods, and the Xie family will not act against the Qin family. Xie Lianying nodded slightly in return, and then said meaningfully, Your horses should be very fast. This middle-aged man who had replaced Qin Tunshan as the Qin family manager knew Xie Lianying's meaning. As long as the Xie family did not act against the Qin family, even if the news of this place spread, and everyone knew that the Qin family was a pawn placed in Guanzhong by the Chu dynasty, they would have enough time to take their family members and flee. Many thanks, we owe the Xie family a favor. The middle-aged man bowed deeply again, and then turned to mount his horse. Today, they and the Xie family were mortal enemies, but now that victory was decided, they were truly grateful for the Xie family's promise. The thunderous sound of hooves sounded again. All of the Qin family members started to flee. Looking at the dozen Xie family members who were safe in the distance, Xie Lianying turned to look at Ding Ning and said softly, but seriously, Today, the Qin family owes us a favor, but the Xie family owes you a favor. Ding Ning said calmly, Xie Changsheng is my friend. Xie Lianying stilled slightly. He laughed and said, This good-for-nothing boy made some good friends. After saying this, he turned around and bowed seriously to Forefather Zhou. He said, The Guanzhong Xie family thanks Elder for your help. Forefather Zhou's gloominess had disappeared from his face, and his expression recovered its benevolence. Just a coincidence. Xie Lianying said seriously, For Elder, it is a coincidence, but for us, it is a matter of life and death. Forefather Zhou looked at Chen Chu's corpse and said, It is worth it to obtain Chu's heavy weapons. What did the Xie family transports? While Xie Lianying and Forefather Zhou were talking, Ding Ning looked at Xie Rou and asked softly. Xie Rou hesitated for a moment, but still said softly, Military equipment. Ding Ning frowned and asked, Very big. Xie Rou did not say anything and nodded. Ding Ning said softly, Transported to Deer Mountain? Xie Rou did not speak or nod. For Ding Ning, this was tacit agreement. Ding Ning frowned and said, How can they be reassured to have the Xie family transport? Military equipment was usually transported by the army themselves. Those that could not be transported by themselves were usually things that could not be transported by the army, were large in number, or were very large and heavy, and would delay the march of the army. The military equipment to be transported to Deer Mountain definitely represented the power of the dynasty, and were extremely intimidating. Even if such military equipment was given to the Xie family to transport, how could it not be escorted by important cultivators of the court? Xie Rou took a deep breath. This matter was extremely confidential and could not be spread. But the Xie family was able to escape this calamity thanks to Ding Ning. Also, Ding Ning had already guessed. There was no meaning in concealing it. We are only transporting some parts and spare parts of the military equipment, not the most important parts. Xiao looked at Ding Ning and said softly, even if the Qin family stole our goods, I fear they do not know that it is a part of a certain military equipment. The same words caused different waves in Ding Ning and Fu Su's minds. Other than the golden crow flame, does Chongling have an even stronger military equipment? Ding Ning frowned deeply and felt slightly uneasy. Fu Su was shocked beyond words. Could it be that the item was finally completed? The dozen people from the Xie family who had been robbed were galloping over. Xiao immediately went forward to ask. When she returned to Ding Ning and Ding Ning's side, Ding Ning frowned and asked, is there a problem with the goods transported? Even someone like Qin Chu could not see it? There is no problem. Xiao's eyes flashed with indescribable joy. Thanks to you, I asked. Qin Chu inspected, but did not find any problems. He thought it was the embryos used to make crossbows. Ding Ning frowned deeply, and his body began to be filled with coldness. The embryos of ordinary crossbows were naturally round and slender objects. If the army could not transport them themselves, there would be an astounding number of them. For him, this meant that a certain idea of the Bazin Kendo ground had become reality. If it was as he thought, then the Yuanwu Emperor's throne would become even more indestructible. The Xie family started to clean up the mess. The dozen Xie family members who had been kidnapped were extremely tired, but at least they had not suffered any serious injuries. The worry-free horn, the silver Rakshasa thumb ring, and Qin Chu's life bond item were all collected by the Xie family and delivered to Forefather Zhou. Qin Chu's life bond item had been compressed into numerous glowing droplets in his body. But now, it was a purple jade the size of a fingernail. It was also not in the shape of a crescent moon. The edges were irregular, and it looked like a piece that had split off from something. After a casual glance, Forefather Zhou called out gently for Ding Ning and Fu Su to return to him. Your sword is not ordinary, but it is incomplete. It is not worthy of you in the future. This worry-free horn is suitable for the White Goat Cave's White Goat Sword Manual, but do not use it easily. If such an important weapon of the Chu is easily revealed, the cultivators of the Chu dynasty will fight for it. Forefather Zhou looked kindly at Ding Ning and gave the worry-free horn to Ding Ning. Just now, you have seen the wonders of this silver Rakshasa thumb ring. You also have to use it carefully. Then he gave the silver Rakshasa thumb ring to Fu Su. These two items were truly important, even more important than the snow dandelion sword that Li Lingjun had given to Mo Chen in the past. But as he expressed his thanks, an unusual emotion flashed through Ding Ning's eyes, whose coldness had not dissipated. Forefather Zhou could not be so generous. Even if he wanted to show generosity for Forefather Zhou, Fu Su was just a friend who had come with him. He did not need to give such an important weapon to Fu Su. Forefather Zhou's actions were definitely unusual. Chapter 183. The setting sun burned like blood. Ding Ning watched as the Xie family members left. On the road in the distance, the figures of the Xie family became smaller and smaller. In the end, they became black dots, as if they were about to melt into the crimson sunset. Ding Ning's expression grew more solemn. The Chun family was one of the wealthiest families in Guangzhou. Today, they had revealed their identity as Chu spies, and even a Realm 7 Grandmaster like Qin Chu, who was rare even among Chu cultivators, had died here. Both Chen Tunchen's death and the battle between Qin Chu and the Xie family cultivators were tragic. But he knew this was just a small shadow of the Deer Mountain Conference. At this time, there would be many Grandmasters like Qin Chu, who were usually high up and did not enter the mortal world. They would travel everywhere just to stop a cultivator, to stop some of the army's food and weapons, just to affect the Deer Mountain Conference. Under such a storm, everyone was as minuscule as the Xie family members who were about to merge into the red sunset. But in each of these shadows, there were many people who performed brilliantly and were worthy of respect. It was these countless silhouettes that formed the real history and allowed the people to live and work in peace and contentment on the vast land. These people should not be erased from the history books. Otherwise, this would be as unfair as Zhang Sun Qianxue said. The Zhou family carriage had been repaired, but forefather Zhou, sitting in the carriage, did not give the order to depart until all the Xie family members disappeared on the distant path. His expression grew colder, and the parts of his body below his abdomen grew colder. He even started to lose feeling. Chen Chu had risked serious damage to his life bond item in order to destroy his energy C and kill him. But he had not expected this to be the death door he had left for Chen Chu from the start. In a battle between Realm Sevens, life and death were decided in such a swift and seemingly ordinary way. From any perspective, Forefather Zhou's victory today was a textbook battle, a victory based on experience and intelligence. But Forefather Zhou had overlooked one point. Even though he had perfectly utilized the flaws in his body was no longer the same as before. He had accurately calculated Chen Chu's strength. He had calculated that the yuan qi that was about to burst into his energy C would be instantly frozen. However, he never expected that his body's 5 qis were already out of balance. All these years, he had only barely managed to adjust them with medicine. Ordinary cultivators, even those with much lower cultivation than him, would naturally adjust when the 5 energies in their bodies were slightly out of balance. It was only a matter of time, and they would not be injured at all. But he was different. When the wild energy charged into his body, threads of scattered energy seeped into his energies. Like a chain reaction, it caused an uncontrollable change. The medicine that he had carefully prepared and stored in his body were unable to adjust this disorder at all. To his body, it had instead become a deadly poison. His sea of qi froze even more. The meridians below the abdomen were completely frozen. At this time, he could no longer walk, and it was also impossible for him to force his true essence below his abdomen. Everything today had originally been under his control. If Xie Lianying was killed, Xie Rou might be easily controlled by him. In the near future, it was possible for him to slowly consume the Xie family. Yet all of this was unexpected because of Ding Ning. Thinking of Ding Ning's performance in today's battle, Forefather Zhou's frosty face started to fill with viciousness. "Come here." He slowly spoke to Ding Ning and Fu Su. Ding Ning, who was silently watching the sunset glow burning on the road in the distance, raised his eyebrows slightly. However, from Forefather Zhou's slightly different tone, he knew that something was going to happen. But he still calmly turned around and walked towards Forefather Zhou's carriage. Fu Su had no wariness towards Forefather Zhou, but when he walked next to Ding Ning and stopped, his pupils contracted as he sensed great danger. The benevolence in his eyes turned into incomprehension and unease. His black hair danced as though a power was about to shoot out. Yet he did not have time to do anything. A black stream of air pushed open the curtains of the carriage and rushed into his body. His body froze. His blood and vital energy were immediately frozen and unable to flow. In the next moment, his body was covered in thick black frost. Ding Ning, who was beside him, was the same. A cracking sound was heard. 2 more flashing white energies flowed out of the carriage and landed on Ding Ning and Fu Su's bodies. This white flow of energy was very gentle, but it pushed some exceptionally cold energy into the depths of Ding Ning and Fu Su's bodies. In their perception, whether it was in their sea of qi or in many of the meridians in their bodies, they were all filled with condensed black ice. These black ice were like countless reefs that blocked the waterways. Blood and energy could slowly flow and maintain the vitality of the body, but once vital energy flowed, it would immediately shatter into powerless waves and bubbles. Why? After the black frost on his body shattered and fell off, Fu Su found that he could speak and immediately asked in disbelief. Forefather Zhou did not immediately answer his puzzlement. He looked coldly at Ding Ning through the carriage curtain. Ding Ning slowly looked up. His body could move right now, but any movement, any part of his body was filled with numbness and pain like a pair of legs that had been sitting for a long time. There is no reason. From the start, I never thought of letting you go. Forefather Zhou laughed savagely and viciously. He looked at Ding Ning and started to answer Fu Su's question. From the moment you helped your senior and junior sect brothers in Ink Garden comprehend many of the cultivation methods of the Zhou family's painting remnant scroll, your outcome was decided. After a pause, Forefather Zhou said disdainfully, the painting remnant scroll is the foundation of the Zhou family in Chongling. For the Zhou family, there are countless powerful possibilities. How can some of the secrets, especially the fiendish methods, be spread outside? While he was talking, Ding Ning didn't say anything. Some invisible little silkworms silently appeared in his body and started to consume the black ice in his body. There were very few little silkworms. Ding Ning was not in a hurry and sensed the speed at which these little silkworms consumed. At this time, Forefather Zhou's face only overlapped with the face of the Forefather Zhou he was familiar with, so his emotions did not change much. But next to him, Fu Su grew angry. The anger of being deceived caused Fu Su's body to tremble violently. Since you already had such thoughts, why did you treat Ding Ning and me like this? What do you want to use us for? He took a deep breath and gritted his teeth as he looked at Forefather Zhou. He said angrily, if you have always been pretending, then why not continue to pretend? Because pretending is very tiring. Forefather Zhou said disdainfully, especially pretending in front of two juniors that you can easily kill. This feeling is very uncomfortable. Ding Ning had not spoken up until now. At this time, he completely sensed the speed at which these little silkworms were consuming the black ice in his body. He said in a slightly cold voice, very uncomfortable. In order to not make Xie Lianing suspicious, you purposefully gave us 2 Chu Dynasty seal weapons. Even I feel disgusted when I think about it now. Forefather Zhou's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said coldly, you do not seem to be very afraid. Ding Ning did not disguise his disdain and sneered. If you wanted to kill us, you would have killed us long ago. Why wait until now? Especially when you wanted to take us to Deer Mountain, from so far away. We naturally have value.
You cannot control yourself now.
I fear that just now, the battle with Qin Shi will not be as easy as it appears. You fear you cannot control us. Forefather Zhou narrowed his eyes, and his pupils contracted. He exuded unimaginable coldness. You have good eyes. Forefather Zhou did not deny it and said coldly, but if you want to blame someone, blame just now for not listening to my orders and acting on your own. Otherwise, even if you died, you would not have suffered so much. What do you want to use us for? Fu Su did not have much fear on his face, only anger. You will know when you reach Wu Mountain. I will not make you wait for long. Forefather Zhou looked down at his legs that had lost all feeling. He said cruelly, because from the start, I did not plan on having you go to Deer Mountain. I will have you die in Wu Mountain.
Fu Su still wanted to say something.
However, Ding Ning stood in front of him and did not allow him to speak. Get on the carriage. Forefather Zhou said coldly. When he said these words, he did not know that in the opposite direction of the sunset glow, in the distant white clouds behind him, there was a pure white shadow flying. It was like a huge fish with white scales on its body. However, it had a pair of pure white wings. 2 long fleshy feelers were also white and slowly floated in the air. There were 2 figures sitting on the back of this strange bird. Chapter 184. One of the 2 figures was an old man with white hair and beard that hung down like ginseng. He was the teacher of the bureau chief of the Clan Law Bureau, Huang Jinwei, and the Yuanwu Emperor. The outside world knew very little about this old man. Almost no one even knew his name. The only thing certain was that his cultivation was very high, and he knew many cultivation theories. He was also very old, and had once been the teacher of the previous emperor. A person like this naturally had extraordinary intelligence. The person sitting respectfully next to him was not Huang Jinwei, who had been studying with him in Chongling, but the dignified palace attendant who often came in and out of the empress' study. She had a small pearl the size of a pigeon egg with countless mirrors in her hand. While she was far away from Forefather Zhou, Ding Ning, Fu Su, and the others, She seemed to be able to see everything happening around Forefather Zhou, Fu Su, and Ding Ning from the Pearl. Official, this person is so vicious. Should we kill him? Seeing Fu Su and Ding Ning being controlled by Forefather Zhou, this dignified palace attendant's eyes turned cold as she asked. She did not ask, "Sir, if you want to kill him, but if you want to kill him." This meant that she had the ability to kill Forefather Zhou even without the old man acting. If we wanted to kill him, we could have killed him when we came out of Chongling. Forefather Zhou is a worm that does not die. How can he have good intentions? But he is a grandmaster of the Qin dynasty. He may have some use on this trip to Deer Mountain. Hearing the palace attendant's murderous words, the old man smiled slightly and said, "Also, I want to see what he wants to do." The palace attendant put away her anger and said slowly, "That wine shop youth is not bad." The old man nodded gently and said, "But we have to see if he can pass this and the Min Mountain sword trials." The palace attendant was silent. Many breaths later, she asked respectfully, "Even you do not have absolute confidence in this conference." Back then, our army killed 400,000 elite soldiers of the Zhao dynasty. Everyone thought that the Zhao dynasty would be completely destroyed in the following month. The old man looked down and said slowly, "But a Zhao sword furnace that suddenly appeared caused our army to be unable to advance. Later on, when our dynasty lost the war against the Chu dynasty, a large part of the reason was that our dynasty had lost too many excellent cultivators in the Zhao lands."
That's just Zhao.
There are too many capable people in the world. The old man looked at the wrinkles on his hands and said, "The rise and fall of a dynasty is never something a cultivator can decide. No one can guarantee what kind of grandmaster will appear in the Deer Mountain Conference this time. The grandmaster of the Zhao sword furnace back then is the best example. The reason I say the Min Mountain sword trials is a test he must pass is because, according to my knowledge, only some of the methods of Min Mountain sword sect can keep him alive. As to the fact that the Deer Mountain Conference was an obstacle he had to pass, it was because the Deer Mountain Conference was related to all the cultivators of the Qin. If there is chaos, cultivators like them will not be able to cultivate in peace." The palace attendant took a deep breath and did not speak. She had thought that she was just worrying for nothing, but had not expected that even the teacher of the Holy Son of Heaven was deeply worried. What she had not expected was that what the old man was truly worried about was the 9-death silkworm that had appeared. The emperor is at Deer Mountain. More than half of the power of the Qin dynasty has left Chongling. If he really is your heir, what will he do at this time? The old man was undoubtedly one of the people who knew that person's abilities the best. So, in his view, if there was a person who could have a fatal effect on the Qin dynasty, then this person would be the heir left behind by that person. But this wise old man would never have thought that the 9-death silkworm he was truly worried about was right in front of him. There were evil waters between the Wu Mountains. There were almost no merchant ships or fishing boats traveling in the turbulent mountain rivers. There were not many people on the shores, and only the occasional cries of apes. But at this time, there were more than a dozen armored ships traveling in one of the evil waters. On the leading ship stood a man dressed in light yellow dragon robes. While he looked calmly at the floating clouds in the sky and the waves in the water, this evil river seemed to be suppressed by his presence, becoming oppressive and respectful. Even the flow of the river was much calmer than usual. Behind him stood many generals in black armor and important people of Chongling. He was naturally the most important person of this Deer Mountain Conference, the Yuanwu Emperor of the Qin dynasty. While even his teacher did not have absolute confidence that the Qin dynasty could regain face in this Deer Mountain Conference, everyone knew that the reason for his lack of confidence was because he was the common enemy of the other 3 dynasties. An ape's cry came from the mountains on the 2 shores and then quickly disappeared as though it had fled far away. This sharp cry caused the Yuanwu Emperor's eyebrows to move slightly, and he stopped thinking. He waved his hand behind him and said, "Bureau Chief Huang, come forward." Huang Jinwei, who had been standing respectfully on the side of the deck and looking at the dangerous forests on the 2 shores, stilled slightly. Then he walked behind the Yuanwu Emperor and was 2 steps behind him. "Stand shoulder to shoulder with me. the Yuanwu emperor said without turning his head to look at him, his hands behind his back. Huang Jinwei took a deep breath. He was shocked but did not say anything. He walked forward and stood on the right side of the Yuanwu emperor. They stood side by side and looked at the waves hitting the rocks in front of them. You are the person I chose. I had my teacher teach you. Strictly speaking, you are my junior sect brother. The Yuanwu emperor said slowly, the reason I chose you is because you are a true national scholar. You know and understand that everything I do is for the dynasty to become stronger so that the people of the world can live and work in peace. You are the person most loyal to me in Chongling. Huang Jinwei nodded slightly in thanks for the Yuanwu emperor's praise. But inside, he could not help but think, in the eyes of the emperor, he was the most loyal to him. Then were the two ministers, the empress, and his teacher not the most loyal to him? You must find it strange why I called you to come forward and stand shoulder to shoulder with me. The Yuanwu emperor looked at the nearby Deer Mountain and said to Huang Jinwei, this is because even the strongest emperor is a person and has his own emotions. Huang Jinwei could not help but glance at him and said softly, this subject does not understand. 3 years before I ascended the throne, no one in the entire Qin dynasty dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. The Yuanwu emperor slowly said, originally, I should have had many people standing shoulder to shoulder with me at this kind of occasion, but they were too stubborn. In the end, I was the only one standing at the bow of the ship and leading the Qin dynasty forward. 3 years before I ascended the throne, I became this lonely one. Huang Jinwei's breathing paused slightly. His gentle and scholarly expression did not change, but his heart tightened slightly. He knew that the emperor's emotions were due to nostalgia and remembering the past, but he did not know what true emotions were contained in this nostalgia. This lonely one has you come forward because I want you to fight shoulder to shoulder with me at the Deer Mountain Conference. The Yuanwu emperor did not look at him. He said softly in a sigh or praise, after this conference, this lonely one will become the true lonely one. Huang Jinwei's eyes suddenly showed unprecedented shock. This lonely one will become the true lonely one. These words were hard to pronounce, but when he heard the Yuanwu emperor change his previous title and call himself this lonely one, he clearly sensed the true meaning. The Holy One had such great confidence in the upcoming Deer Mountain Conference. A streak of black light descended from the sky. It was a black-feathered goshawk. The goshawk landed on the arm of a black-armored general. The black-armored general took out a secret document from a small metal tube tied to its leg and handed it to an abnormally fat man beside him. This unusually fat man gave off a domineering presence. He was another important person in Chongling, Marquis Su of Mount Hung. Marquis Su took a few steps forward, his footsteps causing the entire ship to shake. The first to ascend Deer Mountain was the Chu King. The Chu King worshipped the heavens at Deer Mountain and established Li Lingjun as the crown prince. Marquis Su, who had read the secret document, stood behind the Yuanwu emperor and said softly, the first to ascend the mountain was the Chu, and the first to die will be the Chu. The Yuanwu emperor smiled proudly, without any surprise. He said slowly, this has nothing to do with the Chu King's old age and who takes over the throne. A dynasty that relies too much on external objects will naturally lose their own spirit. Great Chu can produce true craftsmen, but it can never produce true grandmasters of cultivation. Marquis Su smiled domineeringly. At this time, among the various dynasties, the Chu dynasty was the strongest, but even in his eyes, the Chu dynasty was the weakest opponent. Chapter 185. The sky was full of stars. Looking at the stars from the mountain peak, those stars were especially clear. Even the usually invisible silver galaxies were reflected in Li Lingjuan's eyes. The reason this rare conference was chosen to be held at Deer Mountain was because of its unique location. Looking from the mountain peak, one could see the territories of multiple dynasties, and the world was under their feet. Another reason was because of Deer Mountain's height and peace. While Deer Mountain was tall, there was a large patch of flat land at the top. Walking there, one did not seem to be on the mountain peak, but on the plains. At this time, in front of Li Lingjun, a small palace had been built on the flat land at the peak of Deer Mountain. The palace was slender and exquisite, causing people to think of thin waists. An exquisite red carpet led to this palace that had been built in a day. On the two sides of the red carpet were the Chu beauties and powerful cultivators. Seeing Li Lingjun walk over, these beauties and powerful cultivators all bowed in greeting. Today, the Chu dynasty was the first to ascend Deer Mountain. He had been conferred the title of Crown Prince. At this time, among the beauties and cultivators kneeling on both sides, many of them were existences he had to carefully study and even look up to. Looking at these people's respectful and even fearful and regretful appearances, Li Lingjun felt very strange. He should have felt deep hatred towards these people, including his father king in the palace. Yet when he was made the crown prince, this hatred seemed to have dissipated. But perhaps because he had stayed in Chongling for too long, he felt unfamiliarity when looking at these Chu people. He felt like he was a Qin person looking at these Chu people. The Chu crown prince was fated to be the future king of Chu. But before he ascended the throne, the master of the Chu dynasty was still the old man in the palace. According to the rules, he still had to pay his respects in the morning and evening. Walking into the quiet palace, his eyes immediately flashed with an inconceivable emotion. On the pure gold dragon couch, there was no sign of the emperor, whose face was covered in age spots.
Do not worry.
Just like how you did not expect him to leave after ascending Deer Mountain, no one in the world will know that he will leave Deer Mountain at this time. Consort Zhao Xiong, dressed in light robes, looked at his shocked features and said, "Before the Deer Mountain conference starts, he will naturally return." Li Lingjun suppressed a shock, his gaze still fixed on the empty dragon bed. He asked softly, "Where did father go, and what does he want to do?" Consort Zhao shook her head and looked at him seriously. "Even I don't know." Li Lingjun was shocked, speechless. It was unreasonable for a monarch to travel on his own. Also, his body was not in good condition. The Deer Mountain Conference that would decide the fate of the Chu and the entire world was about to start if his father, King Wulia of Chu, who still controlled the entire Chu dynasty, met with an accident before the Deer Mountain Conference. He didn't even dare to think about it because he knew that with his present abilities, he could not deal with and control a situation like this. The Chu emperor, rumored to have been robbed of his body by wine and women, was gravely ill and feared would not live for long, had suddenly left after ascending Deer Mountain. The strongest emperor in the history of the Qin dynasty, the Yuanwu emperor, had taken the path of Wu Mountain. The armored ships were quickly approaching Deer Mountain. At this time, Ding Ning and Fu Su were entering Wu Mountain. Forefather Zhou had not entered Wu Mountain from any of the Qin dynasty's checkpoints. Without checkpoints, this meant that there were no roads that normal carriages could travel. The Zhou family's carriages had been abandoned long ago. Even the 3 carriage drivers did not follow them into Wu Mountain. In the damp and pathless forest, Ding Ning swung the last flower remnant sword to open a path. Behind him, Fu Su carried Forefather Zhou, who could not move his limbs, and followed closely behind. The thick mist had soaked through Ding Ning and Fu Su's clothing. Adding on the water droplets falling from the leaves in the forest, every corner of Ding Ning and Fu Su's clothing started to drip water. Wet and cold, the mountain path was steep and pathless, and there were countless snakes and insects moving through the forest. They had to be vigilant at all times. Even if Ding Ning and Fu Su's vital energy could flow, this kind of journey could not be described as easy. Also, their vital energy was sealed, and even their energies were slow. Knowing that Forefather Zhou would not act before reaching his goal, both Ding Ning and Fu Su's attitudes were not respectful. The blood in half of your body has been completely frozen. Even I can judge that in less than half a year, your entire body will stiffen to death. Fu Su was usually kind, but at this time, his entire body was sore. Also, he had to carry a person he hated in such an uncomfortable environment. His tone was full of disdain. With your body, you are not preparing for your funeral in Chongling, but coming to such a barren place. What do you want to do? Not many days had passed since the battle with Chinchu. At this time, Forefather Zhou's presence was slowly releasing to maintain his body's dryness and cleanliness. However, his face was much thinner, and wrinkles appeared on his smooth skin. A large tree might have been hollowed out by insects, but its roots were still strong, and its branches and leaves could be maintained. But if even its roots were withered, and its energies were in chaos, then this tree was fated to wither quickly. Hearing Fu Su's disdain, Forefather Zhou was not angry at all. The hatred in his eyes had long disappeared into a kind of cold calmness. We are all in similar situations. There is no need to mock each other. While I do not know why you came to this Wu Mountain, if you wanted to come, you would have come long ago. Why did you make me come with you? Hearing Fu Su's disdain and Forefather Zhou's answer, Ding Ning turned to look at Forefather Zhou and asked calmly. Forefather Zhou looked at Ding Ning with true admiration and answered, "Because you are the cultivator with the greatest comprehension ability I have ever seen. I have seen many cultivators with astounding comprehension abilities, but none of them comprehended as quickly as you. In reality, I suspect that even if I did not teach you, you would have comprehended the star fiendish condensation method from the painting remnant scroll." Ding Ning did not look back. He raised an eyebrow and said, "One question each." Forefather Zhou smiled disapprovingly and nodded. He said, "Without my guidance, did you comprehend the star fiendish condensation method from the painting remnant scroll that day?" Ding Ning nodded to show that he admitted it and then asked, "From what you said, you want someone with a strong comprehension ability and a fast comprehension speed to help you.
Why?
Forefather Zhou looked at his back and said, "You will naturally know when the time comes." Fu Su immediately grew angry and said, "You did not keep your word. Taking you to see with your own eyes does not mean I did not keep my word." Forefather Zhou said in a cold voice, "Your talent is not bad. I hope that you will not disappoint me at that time. Otherwise, I will quickly kill you and then return to Chongling to prepare for my funeral." Ding Ning walked in silence for a moment and then suddenly said, "I heard that while Wu Mountain is like Ba Mountain, surrounded by mountains that even hunters cannot go deep, and is suitable for seclusion cultivation and building a hidden sect that cannot be disturbed by the outside world, the climate of Wu Mountain is too damp and cold and is not good for the bodies of cultivators. Also, since ancient times, there has not been a single spirit vein. So almost no sects have been established here, and no ancient sect ruins have been left behind. But because it is so barren, even cultivators do not come out, so there are many vicious beasts and spirit medicines in many places. Some ancient cultivation sects have discovered spirit medicines or useful vicious beasts. However, the spirit medicines or vicious beasts have not fully matured yet. They are also afraid of being discovered and robbed by other sects, so they would often order the powerful cultivators of the sect to lay down some powerful formations to trap them and prevent them from being discovered by the outside world. After saying this, Ding Ning looked back at Forefather Zhou and asked coolly, "Is it spirit medicines or beasts?" Fu Su was slightly startled. He finally reacted. Forefather Zhou immediately frowned. A sharp light flashed through his eyes. "As expected, you are the best strategist of two-level tower. If you can really help me this time, I will give you a chance to choose." He took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. He slowly said, "Help the Zhou family or die." Have you ever thought about what kind of power the Zhou family, the Xie family, and two-level tower will become? Then become the strongest family in Chongling, and then have your liver and intestines cut off by someone? Before Fu Su could imagine such a scene, Ding Ning started to laugh. Buffed, Fu Su could not help but laugh. This really touched Forefather Zhou's reverse scale. In a moment, his hair and beard danced. A terrifying presence swept out with him as the center and formed walls of wind. How much longer? Ding Ning, who was swaying in the wind, looked unconcernedly at the snarling Forefather Zhou. He said coolly, "Rather than wasting this kind of energy, it is better to open a path for me so we can reach that place faster. Maybe I can see some clues faster." Forefather Zhou forced down the murderousness filling his body. He closed his eyes and did not speak. But his body started to release a sharp presence that pointed in front of Ding Ning. Like an invisible sword, it opened a path for people to quickly move forward. Chapter 186. The higher the mountain peak, the stronger the wind, blowing away the rain and mist. Wu Mountain was cloudy and rainy, but these clouds only reached the waist of one of the highest peaks. This peak was the Goddess Peak. Because the peak was so steep, and there were many unknown beasts, even the most experienced herb gatherers did not return after entering this peak. This added to the mysteriousness of this peak. At this time, 3 figures appeared on a protruding cliff at the waist of the Goddess Peak. 2 of them were youths who looked exhausted, and the other was an infinitely old man who was sitting on the cold and hard rock. These 3 were naturally Ding Ning, Fu Su, and Forefather Zhou. The clouds and rain on Mount Wu were different from other mountain ranges. Some places were shrouded in clouds, while others were raining. However, there were some forests that were clear. Looking over, Mount Wu was not a sea of clouds. Instead, there were countless valleys that were covered in mist. It was as if the forest was filled with countless white bowls. They had worked hard to climb to such a height, naturally, not just to see the scenery. Ding Ning turned to look at Forefather Zhou, waiting for him to speak. The sun is at noon. The pillars have fallen. The formation door has just opened, the source of the clouds and rain. Forefather Zhou looked at the sky and said expressionlessly, "Just an hour more. We have to wait until noon to see the abnormality and see where the formation door is?" Fu Su heard the meaning and was even more puzzled. "You brought us here because you want Ding Ning to help you see where the true formation door is? If that's the case, don't tell me that you haven't even entered the real array door. How do you know what you want is inside?" Forefather Zhou glanced at Fu Su and said coldly, "The position of the formation door can change at any time. But even if we cannot see it, we can try our luck. However, I do not have the time to try my luck, nor the body and strength to try my luck. When you see a possible formation door, run there to try. When you find it is not right, run here to look, and then go down to try. The wrong formation door may hide powerful dangers. It is good to be wounded, but if you are not careful, you may be killed." Fu Su understood Forefather Zhou's meaning and said, "This method is really stupid." Forefather Zhou sneered and did not speak. Ding Ning, who had not spoken before, looked at him and said, "Using this stupid method, you entered this formation door in the past, but there are things you cannot deal with inside. So, even if you find something useful to you, you cannot get it." Forefather Zhou maintained his silence. Ding Ning continued, "You should have come here before you were injured in the resistance. But after so many years, you have stayed in Chongling and have not thought about this place. Is it because the things inside are not mature enough and have only matured now?" Forefather Zhou did not deny Ding Ning's guess this time. He nodded and said, 30 years ago, when I just entered Realm 7, I passed by Wu Mountain and coincidentally found this place. Now, I am on the verge of death, but the things inside are suitable. A monster like you, with extraordinary comprehension, has appeared. I think this is fate." Ding Ning looked at him and shook his head seriously. He said, "It is not possible for all the good things to happen to you. Maybe all the good things happened to me," Forefather Zhou said expressionlessly. "There were not many coincidental good things in the world. But waiting may be normal in life." On another high cliff of Goddess Peak, an old man who looked as old as Forefather Zhou was also waiting. He wore a light yellow brocade robe made from the softest silk and the most exquisite jade crown on his head. The white jade crown had naturally formed light red patterns like bright peach blossoms. His face was covered in black and brown age spots. But even so, his facial features were unusually beautiful. Anyone could see at a glance that he had been an extremely handsome man when he was young. At this time, he was silently waiting for the warmest noon sun to fall on Wu Mountain. Unlike Forefather Zhou, he had waited for more than 30 years, and even longer. He also knew that it was not a coincidence that the Deer Mountain Conference and the things in this formation door matured at the same time, but due to arrangement. Because he had set the time of the Deer Mountain Conference. He was the legendary Chu Emperor who was obsessed with the harem and indulged in beauty. The longest-serving emperor in the history of the Chu dynasty. At this time, other than anticipation, this emperor's eyes flashed with emotion and memories. He thought of the time when he was young and dressed in fine clothes and riding on horseback. At that time, he was truly fond of beauty. Often, when he heard that there was a famous beauty, he would travel thousands of miles and indulge himself in the mountains and rivers. He did not know how many beautiful marriages he had left behind. Just like this goddess Peak, the name of this goddess was actually given by him. Time was peaceful, but once it passed, it would not return. Those beauties had turned to dust long ago. Only this goddess Peak still had mist up to her waist, as though she would never age. It was indescribably beautiful. Ding Ning frowned and looked seriously at the world in front of him. The formations left behind by the ancient sect were separated by time. Even he had to be in awe of them. The sun was high in the sky. Forefather Zhou's narrowed eyes suddenly widened. Before he could speak, Ding Ning's calm and serious eyes shone with light. Strong sunlight fell on the bowl-like valleys. Under the refraction of many tiny water droplets, there were no rainbows, but golden pillars of light. Fu Su's breathing paused slightly. He unconsciously thought of the words that Forefather Zhou had said. He sensed that some of the golden pillars of light were different. At this time, Ding Ning had sensed what kind of formation this was. His gaze landed on one of the bowl-like valleys. Much of the true fire energy in the pillars of light that fell into the valley was absorbed by the valley. Invisible water vapor rose from the pillars of light. These pillars of light became unique channels for the water vapor to flow. In his eyes, the scenes in front of him became pure lines again. Countless streams of true fire fell, and countless streams of water vapor intermingled with the true fire and soared upwards. His eyes could not see the exact situation at the bottom of the valley, but he seemed to see all the paths at the bottom of the valley. "Let's go." He turned to look at Forefather Zhou and said calmly, "However, you have to take us down this time. Otherwise, if I am too tired, I may not be able to comprehend the method to enter the formation door." Fu Su was shocked again. He looked in disbelief at Ding Ning. "You are really sure where the formation door is?" Ding Ning glanced at him and said, "Since it is similar to how the three emperors' sect mixed fire and water in the past, and also wants to hide the presence of the seal as much as possible, there will naturally be many channels to guide wind. There will naturally be more than one formation door that can be entered." After a pause, Ding Ning continued, "It is not hard to find a formation door that can be entered. The difficult part is how to resolve the killing power in the formation door." Forefather Zhou's eyes had been filled with disbelief. He did not believe that Ding Ning could see the clues so quickly. But when he heard Ding Ning's words, he took a deep breath. His heart uncontrollably beat violently. "You know a lot," he said slowly. A bone-chilling wind rose from the cliffs. He, Ding Ning, and Fu Su floated up from this protruding rock, passed through the mist below, and slowly floated towards the mountain valley. Goddess Peak might have been the only mistake of the person who had set up this formation in the past. After leaving Goddess Peak and landing in the forest below, even Ding Ning could not sense anything unusual about the golden pillars of light. The person who had set up the formation back then had likely been in the mountains and had not detected that in some places on Goddess Peak, at some special times, this formation would show signs of being detected. The mountain valley, where this formation was located, was very flat. The short trees that stretched as far as the eye could see were soaked in milky mist. It did not look like dry land, but a deep lake. Based on Ding Ning's memories, they landed on the outskirts of the mountain valley. Even Fu Su could clearly sense an ancient presence ahead that gathered in the bright light and spread through the mountain valley. There was also a presence of wind and water that shot into the sky like a fountain, as though it would pierce a hole in the sky. Forefather Zhou's face flushed with an unusual red. He had used a very stupid method to find one of the entrances to this formation. This clear and similar presence caused him to be certain that Ding Ning's judgment was correct. Ding Ning's brows furrowed deeply, and he glanced at the grass and trees around him with an extremely cold gaze. A cultivator who could set up a formation like this far surpassed ordinary Realm 7s. There should be many places inside that could pose a true threat to Forefather Zhou. So, he did not care about Forefather Zhou's thoughts. He focused on studying and sensing this formation that he had only read about in ancient texts and had never seen before. The mist was extremely dense. There was clearly wind flowing around him, but when it blew in front of him, it suddenly disappeared. Even the mist inside did not move, and the grass and trees in the mist were frozen in the air as if they were absolutely still. In this moment, Ding Ning felt pain. The moving plants in the mist turned into countless lines. These lines contained killing intent. They were like countless thorns that filled his body, causing him to feel suffocated and speechless. Pew! A mouthful of blood erupted uncontrollably from his lips. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.